Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is a story about what if Naruto awakens Ashura chakra Chunin Exams. Before I start, please support for more amazing content, and do consider subscribing to my channel and share this video with your friends. This is written by SavageThor and link in description and support writer. Let's start the video. In the heavenly realm of Takamijihara, a single figure could be seen frowning as she looked out with unfocused eyes. The woman in question was breathtakingly beautiful with long silky black hair the length of which fell down to her knees and deep, soulful red eyes. Around her neck was the Yasukani no Magatama, a necklace made of the purest of gold decorated with 5 Magatama, 4 of them gold, yet the centerpiece was not only larger but teal in color. She wore a white and red kimono held closed by a striped white and blue obi. The sleeves of the kimono were large and billowing, each of which were marked by a single red circle. This goddess was none other than Amaterasu no Kami herself, the goddess of the sun. Suddenly her eyes came into focus and a smile slid across her face as radiant as the sun before she flickered out of existence. She reappeared moments later standing within a large office, a single oak wood desk and chair behind her with 3 large pictures decorating the wall. Looking outwards, she was pleased to see that everything was as it should be before snapping her fingers. Instantly several new figures flickered into existence within the office, and she made a quick count of 16. However, before any of them could do more than blink, she snapped her fingers once more, causing even more people to appear along with several couches and reclining chairs. Once done, she herself sat back on the desk and merely watched as they all came to grips with their surroundings. "Hello to all of you," spoke the woman, catching their attention. "Who are you?" questioned one of the men, catching the attention of the rest of the room and shocking many with his appearance. "My name is Amaterasu, goddess of the sun. Now then, as for you all, I've gathered you all here for a mission of extreme importance. I have seen into the future, and as things stand, things do not look well for the world as a whole. I have brought you all together to give you a chance to change it for the better," explained the goddess. "If what you say is true, could this not cause even more potential damage?" questioned one of the younger males. "Normally that would be the case. All actions have either a positive or a negative reaction. However, the future cannot get worse than the one I have seen, and as destiny can be changed, I have brought you all here to give it a shot," explained the goddess. "So what is it we need to do?" questioned a rather excitable boy with short cut dark hair. "Simple. For this, all you need to do is read some things you will be able to see on the screen here." As she said this, the goddess snapped once more, causing a portion of the wall to her right to slide away, revealing a 50-inch screen. "Time outside of this room has been frozen, mostly because you guys are from different points in time, some from the present and others from the future. You will not be allowed to leave this floor of the building until the entire thing has been read, and I've done a bit of redecorating outside this room, bedrooms, bathrooms and the like, all temporary of course," explained the goddess. "I don't get it. If you're a goddess, couldn't you just change things yourself?" questioned another of the adult males with a frown. "That unfortunately is against the rules. One of the fundamental laws of the multiverse is that no god or goddess can directly interfere in the goings-on of the mortal plane. We can at most choose human champions, however there is no telling what they would actually do. Tsukuyami chose a champion recently, and has come to regret doing so as he chose the incorrect path. Basically, we can guide you at most, but it is up to those who live on the mortal plane what ultimately happens. I wish you luck." With that said, the goddess disappeared, and in her place was a rather thick book. "Right, well, I'm out of here," said one of the younger boys. "Stay," called another, his serious tone catching everyone's attention. "I think she was tell the truth," continued the boy, his blue eyes staring at several other figures. "Seriously, do time travel? You know that shit's bogus," exclaimed the other boy, an Inuzuka, judging by the markings on his face. "On one of my missions I had to chase a missing nin from Suna. He himself used a time travel technique which landed us roughly in this time period. I ran into Namikaze Minato on that mission as well as Kakashi, and looking at him now, he's no taller now than he was then. Of course, Minato being the person he was sealed my memories of the event away, along with his own and everyone on that mission, otherwise I'm sure he would recognize me now. Besides, look around and see who else is here," explained the young man, several other young ones doing so only for their eyes to widen in shock. "We may as well, there's no way out anyway as far as I can see," said an older man, his Byakugan eyes active. "Very well then, I suppose introductions are in order. Before anything else, my side will begin. I am Sarutobi Hiruzen, Sandame Hokage," stated one of the men, causing several of the younger ones' eyes to widen. "Oh man, Sandame-sama was freaking hot in his prime," exclaimed one of the girls, a blonde only to be brained by a pink-haired girl and sent crashing to the floor. "I am Namikaze Minato," spoke another male, his voice serious. "Hi, I'm Uzumaki Kushina," exclaimed one of the women, causing several of the youngers from the future to gape, none more so than the blonde teen who'd spoken before. "Hyuga Hayashi," spoke one of the men. "Hyuga Hizashi," spoke another, this one his twin, getting one of the youngsters to tense. I'm Uchiha Fugaku," said another before turning away. "Aburame Shibi, Nara Shikaku," said another. "Akimichi Chuza, Yamanaka Inoichi, Inazukatsum. I'm Uchiha Mikoto," spoke one, the last of the women. "Right, I'm Uchiha Obito," said another teen with a grin. "Noira Rin, pleased to meet you," said a young girl with a polite bow. "Hataki Kakashi," said the masked teen before going back to ignoring the group. Right, I suppose I'll start for our group then. I'm Senju Tsunade, Godame Hokage, said a blonde bombshell of a woman, causing Obito to gape in awe, while Kakashi managed to keep it hidden thanks to his mask. I'm Jiraiya, the Gama Sannin, greeted the white-haired sage, his serious demeanor throwing several people of the present off. Sarutobi-asuma, stated one another, causing the Sandame to go wide-eyed in surprise, not seeing the looks from kids behind him. However, Yash, I am Konoha's sublime green beast Mato Guy, exclaimed another, complete with cool guy pose. I am Yuhi Kurinai, stated another female, her large stomach showcasing pregnancy, causing the three teens from the present to gape. Yash, I'm Konoha's beautiful green beast Rock Lee, exclaimed Guy's miniature clone spandex, bowl cut and all. Kami-sama, they allowed him to spawn, whispered the young Kakashi in horror. I'm Tenten, said the bun-haired girl with a smile. Hyuga Niji, spoke one of the two Hyugas, not breaking eye contact with Hizashi, who had lost his composure upon hearing the name. Tch troublesome, I'm Nara Shikamaru, spoke another, only after being nudged to do so. Yamanaka Ino, hi daddy, said the blonde girl before waving excitedly at Inoichi. I'm Akamichi Choji, said the last of the new Ino Shikacho group before going back to his bag of chips. Chuza could tell he was eating nervously. Abirame Shino, came the monotone voice. Inuzuka Kiba. Ano, I'm Hyuga Hinata, came the soft-sounding voice, surprising many of those not used to her. I'm Haruno Sakura, said the pink-haired girl, bowing politely. I'm Uzumaki Naruto, Gama Sannin, said the blonde with a grin. Kushina's son then, but who's the father? Thought Minato to himself. What, seriously? When the hell did you learn Senjutsu? Hell, Minato never learned Senjutsu, exclaimed Jiraiya, shocking everyone with his vehemence. Fukusakajiji taught me after you died. Not even 2 months ago in our time, you were killed and aimed by the proxy leader of the Akatsuki, said Naruto, causing Jiraiya to deflate. Seriously, damn, muttered the white-haired Sannin in shock. I suppose we should start then. Who wants to go first? Questioned the Sandame, taking a seat behind the desk. One of the perks of the job was the chair the Shodai had created it with comfort in mind. I will, Sandame-sama, said Sakura, always eager to read before taking the book and moving to take a seat. As they did, most of them gravitated so that they were either with their teammates, or friends, or grouped together. Naruto himself found himself stuck between Sakura and Hinata on a small couch, much to the amusement of Kiba, Choji, and Shikamaru. Okay, it has a disclaimer. The contents in this book will be told in their entirety, and may include extreme violence and sexual situations. Content that is not fit for children to be reading, and is rated M for mature, and explains what could happen in one of many alternate universes. Despite this, the words therein are entirely truthful, and as such beware of bruised egos and possible embarrassment to mortifying levels. Amaterasu, read Sakura quickly with a raised eyebrow. Chapter, A New Hope. Devastation. That was all that could be seen as one looked around the wasteland that had once been a country, and everywhere you looked corpses littered the landscape. From his position, Kurama, the Kyuubi no Kitsune himself, snarled as he glared at the despicable form of Uchiha Madara, the irredeemable bastard whose schemes had launched the world into the Fourth Great Shinobi War. Wait, hold on a second. Did you just say Fourth Great War? Exclaimed Obito. Yeah, the war just broke out. We were actually on the front lines before we were brought here, said Niji. Damn, we're still in the midst of the third, said Obito. I'm guessing Iwa and Kumo are the enemy, stated Hiruzen. No, the 5 great nations have allied together to combat the threat of Akatsuki, a criminal organization composed of S-class nukenin that have been capturing and sealing away Biju. As of now, only the 8 and 9 tails have not been captured, said Tsunade. Basically, they want to trap the world in an eternal genjutsu, said Naruto, causing the Uchihas present to collectively roll their eyes. Kurama, you could have told me that was your name a while ago, thought Naruto, placing a hand to his stomach, not seeing the shocked look cross Kushina's face as he did. You have not earned the right to learn my name, let alone speak it. Do not do so again, came the deep, menacing tone from within the depths of his mind before the voice faded away, though he could still feel the fox's consciousness. He dug himself in his clawed paws, keeping him secured as the arrogant bastard tried to reel him in, having managed to snatch him right out of his container mere moments ago. Already his siblings had been forcibly sealed inside the damnable statue, so that was the husk of the Jubi, and he had no wish to share their fate. He himself had managed to keep himself planted by virtue of being not only the eldest, but also the strongest of the Biju. Even still, the situation was extremely bleak. Despite his pride in his abilities, he knew he couldn't keep fighting the pull much longer, not as he was. With only half of his full power available to him after that idiot Namikaze had split his chakras into 2 halves, he was nowhere near his full strength. If things had worked out otherwise and he could access his full power, the Uchiha wouldn't be acting so arrogant. As it was, he had sent Shikaku's former container off to try getting his Yin chakra transferred into Naruto in order to preserve his life, but that was only a band-aid solution at best, and as such was not his real goal, which had just been to get the redhead away from the front lines. Damn it! How the hell did I lose? Exclaimed Naruto, actually angry. Uchiha Madara was a monster. In the history of this village, only the Shodai has ever rivaled him in power, spoke the Sandame. Gigi, I know I can't win every fight, I lost enough as a kid to know that, and I know eventually someone is going to get the better of me. You taught me that much. However, this battle is one I can't afford to lose," said Naruto, his eyes unfocused as he stared outward. Sakura, seeing this, decided to continue on. As it was, he couldn't help but curse everything under the heavens for this current situation. The fact that Madara had been completely revived and was no longer just an Edo Tensei zombie meant that the pretender hadn't been put down, and had somehow managed to use the Rinnegan's resurrection technique. Oddly enough, he could still feel the pretender's life force, meaning he was clinging to life, so as long as they killed him quickly and destroyed the head, at least Madara wouldn't have both of his eyes restored. Unfortunately, Madara chose just that moment to give a might tug of the chain wrapping around his neck, and the might Kitsune found himself sucked inside the statue. While the ancient Uchiha savored the moment, however, the yin half of the fox, safely sealed away within the body of Namake's Minato, smirked as finally he felt the red-headed teen settle both himself and Naruto down right beside Minato. "Wait, why is half of its power sealed into me?" questioned Minato with a frown. "From what I understand, when the fox attacked Konoha, you split it in half, sealing the yang chakra into Naruto, while the yin was sealed into yourself since you needed to take something with the Shiki Fuin," explained Jiraiya, causing Minato to pale. The fox chuckled before pausing as a new sensation hit his senses, causing him to frown. So even he had not been spared, but this could work in his favor. Flaring the scattered bits of power that still remained spread out around him from Naruto's crafty usage of his chakra earlier, the fox either sucked it away or flared it higher, in others, even transferring it in several cases. Across the battlefield, several people were startled as the flame-like cloak of the fox was suddenly engulfing them once more. Those people were Harino Sakura, Hyuga Hinata, Nara Shikamaru, Akimichi Choji, Aburaim Shino, Rock Lee, Tenten, Hataki Kakashi, Gaara and his siblings Temari and Kankuro, among others who were covered, only this being for the first time. "All of you listen, and listen well," called the fox, using the chakra engulfing them to speak mentally to all of them at once. "This battle is a lost cause. As it stands, there is no way to turn things around. There is only one way to fix this that I know of, and it's a long shot at best. I'll be using what's left of my power to use a technique passed down to me by the Rakuto himself. This is a one-shot jutsu, and as such we will only have one chance to fix things, so don't fuck this up." With that said, and without giving any of them a chance to reply, his power flared out from both himself and Minato, forming into a massive fox construct surrounding the revived Hokage, and with his chakra syncing up with that spread throughout the battlefield before the fox's body burst apart, and the world was suddenly awash in flames. At the sight of another figure, itself stopped to take note of this event, as its conscious mind though was busy doing other things and was suddenly struck curious about what the fox intended. In truth, it knew full well what the bijou was trying to accomplish, as it was a technique that it had created itself. Still, it found itself curious as to the outcome of the fox's gambit. As such, it was that curiosity that had it add just a small bit of its own power to the fox's technique, and give it just a small push. "Great, now what new hell is this?" thought Uzumaki Naruto, groaning as his eyes slowly opened. "Did I die?" questioned the teen aloud as he slowly picked himself up, only to freeze as a memory hit him. "Hey, look, the screen's active!" exclaimed Obito. Turning towards it, the group could see Naruto's eyes open blearily as he lied in what looked to be water within a darkened cavern. Suddenly the screen shifted scenes and several people screamed as they could Niji lying on the ground with multiple wounds upon him. His hidete had come off, exposing his caged bird seal, and 2 large wooden spears had pierced him through the back. "Naruto, Hinata-sama is willing to die for you. So you hold more than one life in your hands. And it seems that my life too may have been one of them," spoke Niji softly, struggling to get the words out. Why would you do this here?" "You were going to change the Hyuga," said Naruto. "Long ago it was your words that freed me from the shackles of fate." The words echoed from the screen, clearly his thoughts, as the scene shifted to show younger versions of the two clearly mid-battle before it shifted back to the present versions. "Why would you go so far, even give up your life for me?" questioned Naruto, his voice thick with emotion. "Because you called me a genius," were his last words as the curse seal faded from his forehead, and the screen cut off. "I died," spoke Niji, nearly numb at the scene, while Hinata, Tenten, Lee and Guy were crying at the sight. Seeing this, Sakura decided to continue reading to get everyone's mind off that horrible image. "By which means did you die? Your personal ethical point of view towards death differs greatly from someone as from my era. For one, comprehend and adjust to the word death. Your mettle is quite impressive, newbie," spoke a voice from off to his right. "Who are you?" questioned the blonde as he turned to face the voice, only for his eyes to widen. Hovering before him as if meditating on air was an old man. Even by Sarutobijiji's age this guy would appear ancient. He was a pale-skinned man with deep wrinkles covering him. Spiky shoulder-length pale red hair covered his head, with a chin-length braid hanging in front of his left ear. He had a pair of short horns growing naturally out of his head, but that wasn't what caught the blonde's attention. No, that honor went to his eyes. Though possessing no eyebrows, his eyes were a pair he would never forget, deep purple and marked with concentrated circles rippling out from the center pupil, the Rinnegan, just as he had seen them in Nagato. However, unlike Nagato, in the center of this man's forehead rested another Rinnegan eye, only a deep red in color. He wore a white full-length kimono with a pattern of 6 black magatama around a high collar, beneath which was a necklace with the same number of magatama, and in his hands, leaning against his shoulder, was a shakujo. "Impossible!" Came the voice of the fox from within the blonde's mind. What's up, fox? Questioned Naruto, only to be ignored. As to why you are here and what this is, it is surely a valid inquiry, though I do worry if perhaps by revealing my name it may influence your thoughts and opinions as it had your predecessors. I am the creator of peace, law and order. I am he who is known as Hagoromo, said the old man. Naruto understood his name, but everything else confused the hell out of him. Your reaction was expected. Being that I am able to read omens and signs, precognition, premonition and such, I had already anticipated such a response, said the old man. What the hell did he say? Questioned Kiba, his face scrunched in confusion. Basically that he knew Naruto would be confused, said Asuma with a sigh. Then why not say it in a way that makes sense? Questioned the young Inuzuka. Because old people are weird, Kiba. Gigi used to say stuff just to confuse people all the time. Outside of Genin hazing, it was his favorite pastime, said Naruto, shaking his head. You mean like the time Sandaime-sama came to the academy in third year and gave that long-winded speech that confused everybody? Questioned Ino. Yup, said the blonde, popping the pea, causing several other people to sweat drop, and said Hokage to chuckle nervously. Haruno-san, you can continue now, said the Sandaime, hoping to get attention off of himself. Sorry, old man, but started Naruto, only to be cut off. You possess quite a scrupulous and observing eye for scrutinizing others. Perhaps if you were to turn it upon yourself, you too would gain a realistic comprehension of your circumstances. You have yet to die. This is your inner world, your inner spirit, or mindscape if you will. Now I can understand why you would feel such urgency, but in this particular case it would be best to find ourselves idle. Get on with it already. Can't you just talk normally for a second? Kami-sama, I feel like Kiba talking to Shino, roared the teen before grumbling to himself. Dude, Shino doesn't confuse me that much, exclaimed Kiba, causing everyone else to deadpan. Alright, fine, he still confuses me. But we've been on the same team for 3 years, damn it, I get what he says for the most part now, exclaimed Kiba. The old man was silent for several long moments, both he and Naruto staring each other in the eye, the one of them looking away. Naruto of course would never look away from another man's eyes when they spoke. Sarutobi had always told him that when you talk to a man you look him dead in the eye. Only people he didn't like doing that with were the Hyuga. Those guys would turn it into a staring contest, and you could never actually tell if they were looking at you or past you. At these words the 3 Hyuga males had their posture straighten as one, as if they took pride in those words, while Hinata looked down. Of course Hinata was different, but he didn't like staring into her eyes too long. It always left him feeling funny the way she would look at him. Even as a kid she'd had this strange effect on him. It was weird and made him act differently, like with Ino, but magnified by like 1,000. It's why he'd chased after Sakura so hard. She didn't make him feel weird. Read Sakura before stopping and reading it over quickly. Wait a damn minute. All that time you were chasing after me and you were crushing on Hinata and Ino, pig, exclaimed Sakura, swinging a fist down on his head. As it made contact there was a puff of smoke and suddenly cotton was floating everywhere as Naruto appeared sitting beside Minato and Kushina, shocking everyone with the quick substitution, well except for Hinata, who was blushing hotly. Sakura-chan, I've seen you hit things, and you've mastered Bachan's super strength technique. There's no way I am ever letting you hit me again, said Naruto, causing Sakura to grumble before turning back to the book, leaving everyone else sweat dropping. How about this then? Spoke the old man, finally breaking the stare down. Yes, perfect, exclaimed Naruto in relief. Now that we can finally talk, who the hell are you, old man? Also, if you know what this place is, how do I get out? Don't ask too many questions at once. I am someone who died long ago. I am a priest who now exists as pure chakra, and I have traveled this world across time to witness what has and what will become of Nishu. My name is Hagoromo, and as he who first founded Ninsu, I am also known as the Rakudo Sannin, stated the old man. Wait, so the Sage of Six Paths is actually real? Questioned Obito. You've heard of him? Questioned Minato. Yeah, but I always thought he was just a fairy tale, said Obito. Deep inside both Naruto and Kushina in unison, the two of them could both hear a scoff in the back of their minds. What, the same old sage who Erosenin and Nagato talked about? Exclaimed the teen in shock. Ah, so you do know of me. Of course I do. You're the person who created ninjutsu in the beginning, aren't you? Questioned the teen, eyes wide in shock. No, not ninjutsu Nishu. My Nishu was created to inspire hope. Do not confuse it with ninjutsu, which was made to create war, said Hagoromo. Regardless of that, if you really are the sage, there are a ton of things I want to ask you, exclaimed the teen, only to be cut off as the man slammed the head of the shakujo he held into the water beneath them. Looking down, Naruto was greeted to the sight of the rippling water before his reflection changed. Instead of himself he was looking at another person, also male, only he had short, spiky brown hair, 2 locks of which were wrapped in bandages framing either side of his face. He wore bandages wrapped around his forehead and a light-colored kimono with magatama decorating the collar, so that they appeared to be wrapping around his neck like a necklace. So I was right, you are my son Ashura's. Anyway, everything appears to be in order. The time is right, so there is something I wish to entrust with you, said Hagoromo. You're not making sense again, so can you help me get out of here at least? I apologize, that is something I cannot do. That depends on the people outside, they can do things to you. I can only talk to you, said the man. I see, muttered Naruto with a frown. For now, put it out of your mind, worrying will get you nowhere. For now please listen, this is something that you need to hear. We will begin with my mother and children, spoke the man. So a history lesson? Questioned Choji. Indeed. However, if this person truly is the sage of legend, this is information that is extremely valuable. Everyone listen well. Stated Hiruzen. Hey, check it out, screen's back on. Said Kiba. The screen itself simply showed a picture of a woman with extremely long sweeping light-colored hair that actually touched the ground. Like Hagoromo, she had horns which stuck out from her head, only much longer. She wore a light shade of lipstick and eyebrows which were cut short, but it was her eyes which caught the most attention. Is that the Byakugan? Questioned Tenten in shock. Yes, it is. Said Hayashi, surprised, having no idea that the bloodline was actually so old. There's another eye in her forehead. Looks like a cross between the Rinnegan and the Sharingan. Said Jiraiya, frowning. My mother Otsutsuki Kagaya had come to your land from far away. She had come to pluck the fruit from the sacred tree, the very same tree you have seen in this war. She had come for the fruit of its chakra. With the power she gained from consuming the fruit, she was able to rule over this land. Such was her power. At the time they worshipped her as either the rabbit goddess or the demon. Later she gave birth to 2 children, one of which was me. Later, in order to repent against the remaining sins of our mother, we fought against the physical incarnation of the sacred tree, the Jubi, and sealed it within ourselves. The sacred tree frenzied and struggled to reclaim the chakra that had been stolen from it. As time went on, I too had 2 children. The older of which I named Indra, the younger was named Ashura. I taught them both Nishu. However, there was one huge difference between the 2. One of them had inherited my strong chakra genes and one had not. The difference manifested itself in an extreme manner. In other words, the superior older brother was Indra and the flunky, useless dropout younger brother Ashura. Useless dropout, even though his dad was the Rikudo Sennin. Muttered the teen, depressed. Sakura stopped here as she could see the book Naruto wasn't the only one depressed. The words had triggered something in the Naruto there with them, and he was now sitting with his arms wrapped around his knees and head resting on his thighs. He wasn't the only one, however, as both Hinata and Lee had retreated into themselves equally depressed, something that did not go unnoticed. Perhaps I shouldn't tell you this. But no matter how superior or excellent the parents are, their power won't necessarily be inherited by the child, as I'm sure you know. You were very much the same, weren't you, Naruto? Naruto said nothing, eyeing the screen for a moment, seeing its new picture before turning away, burying his face in his thighs. Following his gaze for a moment, Kushina gasped before wrapping her own arms around the boy who was now confirmed as her son. After a few moments, everyone else connected the dots, finding a picture of Kushina and Minato on the screen. I figured that was what you meant, said Naruto, blowing out a dejected breath of air. Yes, and you resemble Ashura in what you have done as well. Indra and Ashura walked very different paths. Since birth, the elder brother Indra had powerful eyes and a strong sense for battle. He was touted as a genius. He did everything with his own power and understood that his power was special and different from those around him. He came to believe that with power anything was possible. On the other hand, you had the younger Ashura, who since birth was bad at everything he did. He couldn't do anything by himself. To achieve the same strength as his brother, he needed huge amounts of his own effort and the cooperation of those around him. And soon the chakra inside his body bloomed and he found power on the same level as his brother. He understood that everyone working together to help him is what made him strong. As the man said this, Naruto himself was thinking the story reminded him of not just himself, or even Lee, but of Hinata. Shy, quiet and kind, the girl he'd once told he thought she was weird, but he liked that about her. Heiress of the Hyuga clan, yet passed over for a younger sister 5 years her junior simply because she was kind and could not bring herself to do harm to her family. After Pain, or rather Nagato, had crushed Konoha into a smoking crater, he had done some investigation of his own on the girl who, when everyone else had cowered away, had rushed onto the battlefield to aid him, not out of a sense of duty but because she genuinely cared about him. Not even Sakura, his own teammate, had left her cover when it looked like things were going to turn bad. But Hinata had, and he had watched stunned as she had beat his ass. If not for the abilities of his Deva Path's Rinnegan, Hinata would have crushed him. Hinata had gone into a full-out atomic blush at the words and was about a step away from fainting on the spot. If it wasn't for Kurenai, who chose that moment to sit next to her, pulling her into a one-armed embrace with one arm wrapped around the younger girl. Meanwhile, both Hayashi and Hizashi were frowning but also introspective on the words heard, but neither said a word. Through his trials, Ashura came to understand what it meant to care for others and that with love anything was possible. Through the way Ashura lived his life, I began to realize a new possibility, so I divided up the power of the Jubi that was inside me and gave names to its parts. I believed that the bonds of cooperation were where true power lay, and I also made Ashura the leader of Nishu so that he could guide everyone. I thought that Indra would join in and cooperate, but he would not accept that. That was the very moment this long war began. When their bodies were destroyed, the chakra that they had built up didn't disappear. Instead, they were reborn time and time again throughout the ages. Finished Hagoromo. That sounds like being possessed by a ghost or something. So who's the unlucky guy being possessed by them now? Questioned Naruto, shivering in the beginning. For all his power, he still hated ghosts. Seriously? You're an S-class shinobi and you're scared of ghosts? Exclaimed Ino incredulously. Ino, you can't fight ghosts. You want me to take on some crazy powered S-class shinobi? Edo Tensei Sandame Reikage, sure, bring it on, sounds fun. But until you can tell me how to punch a ghost and my fist not fall through, leave me the hell out of it. That's why I hate fighting that masked Madara. You fought the Sandame Raikage? Questioned Minato. Yeah, like 2 hours ago. Just don't ask me how to beat him, since one of you might kill him, and that would probably mess everything up, said Naruto before turning to Sakura, who was snickering. What's so funny? Questioned the blonde. You, said the girl. What? Questioned Naruto with a frown, only for her to hold up the book. You, Naruto, Ashura was reborn into you. Came the shocked cry of the blonde. Reincarnation, huh? Mused the Sandame, his mind whirling with possibilities. TCH troublesome, said both Naras. With my eyes I can see it clearly, Ashura's chakra clinging tightly to you, said Hagoromo. However, Naruto said nothing, arms crossed and face in a frown. Judging by how you're not surprised, you've probably already felt Ashura's presence inside of yourself, haven't you? Questioned the sage. Naruto said nothing, however for a split second his mind went back, 3 years previous. 2 teens, a battle at the Valley of the End, Rasengan versus Chidori. At the last second he dismissed the Rasengan, not able to kill his foe even after this hellish of a day, and instead took the Chidori to the chest, the second one of the day. Naruto, you let Sasuke-kun win, breathed Sakura in shock. The Chidori, despite being an A-rank technique, is actually much weaker than the Rasengan. It is a technique that Kakashi-sensei came up with when he was trying to add lightning chakra to the Rasengan, and failed. The Rasengan at its core is a self-sustaining storm. If I don't consciously hold it back, it will break through and kill anything it hits, explained Naruto quietly. And our mission was retrieval, not elimination, said Shikamaru, removing a pack of cigarettes from his vest and popping one in his mouth. He didn't move to light it, but the weight was comforting. Wait a minute, I'm your Jounin-sensei? Questioned the young Kakashi in surprise. Yup, me, Naruto and Sasuke-kun, Team 7, said Sakura with a grin. You forgot Sai, said Naruto. Right, but Sai isn't an original member. Where the hell is he anyway? Stated then, questioned Sakura. Well, what happened to us? Questioned Obito, motioning to himself and Rin. Obito, you died on a mission to destroy Canopy Bridge. Your team is ambushed by a team of IWA Jounin. In the end you managed to save the lives of both of your teammates, but your body was crushed during a cave-in they caused. The last thing you did was give Kakashi your left eye, the Sharingan, replacing the eye he lost in battle earlier in the day, explained Naruto, causing his entire team to pale. That's today, that's the mission we were on before we came here, said Rin in shock. Hokage-sama, I'd like to alter the parameters of my own mission. I request I stick with my team until the mission's completed. When they are safely away I will join the frontline battle, said Minato, turning to the Sandame. Granted, get those 3 home safely, said Hiruzen, not even hesitating. As for Rin-san, I don't know for certain what happened. Sensei would say is that she died on a mission during the war, said Naruto sadly, causing said Kunoichi to look down. Sakura, continue, said Tsunade after a lapse in silence. As I suspected. In that case you've probably already figured out who the older brother's Indra's successor is. He was right, Naruto didn't need it spelled out for him. From what it sounded like, Indra and Ashura were complete opposites. One who was given everything and one who was denied everything. One who was handed everything he could ever want, and one who had to scratch and claw for scraps. It's Uchiha Sasuke, said Naruto after a few moments. Correct, so you did feel it, said Hagoromo. What happened to the previous successors? How did they end up? Questioned Naruto. The successors of the previous generation were Senju Hashirama and Uchiha Madara. Hashirama was Ashura and Madara was Indra. I don't think I need to tell you how that ended up. However, before Madara could pass on to the next successor, he introduced a problem. Consumed with his lust for power, he took Hashirama's strength. In other words, Ashura's chakra and Indra's chakra were fused together. This resulted in the awakening of my own chakra's power. He awakened the Rinnegan. Both Indra and Ashura had predicted that one day such a family would appear and left clues for it on my stone monument, though the meaning had become lost. From what I know, only the Senju and Uchiha clans descend from your bloodline, so how do I fit into this? Questioned Naruto with a frown. There are 5 great clans. Uchiha and Senju, from me, the Hyuga, and Kagaya from my brother. Then there is the last clan. Ashura, like myself, had 2 sons, his twins. When he died, the twins were split up for their protection. As you know, one created the Senju, the other created the Uzumaki. I see, said the blonde, getting a nod from the sage. Now then, the chakra of Nishu is the power to connect people to one another. It is my belief that no one person's chakra should be much greater than any other person's. For example, Kagaya, even though she brought an end to a troublesome time, controlled things with the power of just one person. Eventually it gave rise to great hubris, and the woman once thought of as a goddess had become known as a demon. If power is accumulated into just one person, eventually too much will drive that person mad. Right now the same thing is happening to Madara. Just like Kagaya, Indra's last successor has obtained the power of the Jubi, a power close to mine, and is attempting to gain a power like Kagaya's. However, the Mugen Tsukuyomi does not only create genjutsu. It puts on into an illusionary dream forever, and while each person lives on in that dream, the user has full access to that person's chakra. This means that each person connected to the god tree will in essence be nothing more than slaves. From that point all chakra will once again become one and a new chakra fruit will grow. Madara will then consume the fruit and become as strong as Kagaya using the techniques she developed. Finished the sage. So all of this is simply because an Uchiha wants more power. I'm not surprised, said Kiba, shaking his head. If Sasuke truly is the successor to Madara, they may think on the same wavelength, said Shikamaru, frowning. Perhaps we should have killed him then, said Shino. No, you don't understand, said Naruto, his eyes and vocal tone catching everyone's attention. You guys grew up with happy lives, so I don't expect you to truly understand. The place Sasuke is at right now, the darkness he has enshrouded himself in, you can't truly understand it if you've never lived in it. Niji's tasted it before, but he was only at the shallow end, and it didn't take much to bring him out of that darkness. Until you have truly from the depths of your heart wished death on the entirety of the village, you won't understand. Yes, Sasuke has entered the true depths of the abyss, but I was born in it. He can still be pulled back, said Naruto, a serious frown on his face. Even so, what can we do? He abandoned the village and put you in a 3-day coma. Not only that, but since he's been gone, he's aligned himself with a number of S-class criminals, joined the Akatsuki. Hell, he kidnapped the Raikage's brother, even murdered the proxy Hokage, said Shikamaru. I have no problem with Danzo being killed. I can write that off as community service, said Tsunade. He threatened to destroy the village, said Kiba, exasperated. What do you expect? Sasuke idolized Itachi, then he killed Itachi. He murdered his brother, the only person he truly cared about. He's going after anyone who could have had a hand in what happened between the two of them, and blaming the village, said Sakura. None of you have to worry about it. Like I told Itachi, I'll take care of Sasuke from now on, said Naruto. You're talking about my son Sasuke, right? What happened to him? Why did he do those things? Questioned Mikoto, her hands clasped tightly together. Due to being constantly ignored by his father from a young age and forced into the shadow of his genius older brother, Sasuke developed an inferiority complex. Later, after incorrect decisions made by the civilian council, he was spoiled and developed a superiority complex. The only constant in his life was Itachi, who had become this almost mythical figure for him who he was determined to surpass. Unfortunately, the civilian council had already paid off his therapist before I returned to Konoha, so there's no way of knowing exactly how messed up he was, explained Tsunade. Well, can you tell me where we were or why one of my children would murder his own brother? Demanded Fugaku, his Sharingan eyes spinning furiously. You were dead. The both of you were killed when Sasuke was 7 years old, explained Tsunade, causing both adult Uchiha's eyes to widen in shock. Rumor is one night Itachi went crazy and mad with power. He single-handedly slaughtered the entire Uchiha clan. He left only one survivor, his little brother Sasuke. It became known as one of the bloodiest nights in village history, the night of the Uchiha massacre, said Niji, shocking everyone not from his time period. Sasuke had been out training and arrived to find the streets of the Uchiha district covered in blood and dead bodies. He arrived home just in time to find his brother clad in his ANBU-issued armor sans the mask, standing over the corpses of their parents, their blood still coating the blade of his sword. Using one of his strongest techniques, a genjutsu called Tsukuyami, Itachi forced Sasuke to relive the entire thing over and over again for 72 hours within a mental realm, one which he had complete control over, explained Naruto, causing everyone to pale who hadn't known this detail. That, however, isn't the complete truth, said Naruto after a few moments, gathering everyone's attention once more. I ran into an Edo Tensei of Itachi not long ago. He informed me that he had never intended to kill off the entirety of the clan, but someone else had been there that night, and took matters into his own hands. Due to the trauma of the event, Sasuke had unconsciously activated his Sharingan. Itachi had no choice but to use Tsukuyami in order to overwrite what Sasuke saw in a misguided attempt at protecting him, explained Naruto. That makes sense. I always thought it was odd. There is no way a clan as powerful as the Uchiha could be taken down by a single person, even if it's Itachi, said Shikamaru. Incorrect. Itachi at 13 couldn't pull it off, but Itachi as he was at 18, let alone 21, could do it. Itachi is as close to rivaling Uchiha Madara as that clan has ever gotten in terms of power and ability, said Shino. Did he tell you who else was there? Questioned Tsunade. It's obvious who it was, said Shikamaru. Yes, the same man responsible for the deaths of my parents, the man who caused the Kyuubi attack. It was that bastard in the mask, said Naruto before motioning to Sakura to keep going. So help me out of here so I can stop him, said Naruto, a determined glint in his eyes. I think you truly do want to stop him. Unlike any of the previous successors, you've got this strange bit of foolishness to you. That could quite possibly be what has given birth to this newest possibility. Even though you've been dead and watching over things for this long, and seen the world come to this. Thank you for still believing in us, said Naruto, causing the man to scoff. Don't thank me, I don't have that kind of vision. The world right now is what Indra, no, what my mother would have had it become. This is simply the natural flow of events from then. I'm simply being selfish in trying to stop them. Even as I thought I could use the bijou, the world used them not for peace but as weapons. My way of thinking was too naive. Not at all. You weren't wrong at all, said Naruto with a smile. That's right, old man. Came a new voice, surprising both. Turning to the voice, both were surprised as new figures made their appearance, their forms slowly emerging from the water beneath them. The first to make its appearance was one Naruto was quite familiar with, having actually fought against him when he was 13. Shikaka! What are you doing inside of me? Exclaimed the blonde in shock. Dude, that sounds so wrong when you say it like that. Snickered Kiba. Shut up, pervert! Exclaimed Ino before Kiba found his face meeting the ground from a solid fist to the top of his head. That Obito guy, he took part of mine and Shikaku's chakra out of Madara. He knew which ones you still needed inside of you, said the Hachibi, Gyuki, as he also rose from the water. Seriously, Obito did? Questioned the shocked teen. Much has happened outside. Came the voice of the fox as it rose up, its light-colored fur a sight for sore eyes. With this, the chakra of all the Biju is inside of you, Naruto. Came an equally powerful voice as another fox appeared, its dark brown fur making Naruto's eyes widened. Seriously, the other half of Kurama is here too? Exclaimed the blonde, shocked. The promised time has finally come, old man. Stated the brown-furred fox. That is true, Kurama. Just as Gamamaru predicted, a mischievous blue-eyed boy who calls out the names of the 9 beasts. It appears you have charmed them all into lending you their strength. My spirit calls them forth. Ashura's successors shall bow as well. Shikaku, Matabi, Isabu, Son Goku, Kuku, Saiken, Chomei, Gyuki, Kurama, the time has come for the child of prophecy to change the world. However, Kurama, I feel you have already initiated that last resort technique. Naruto, what do you want to do? When everything is all over, what would you seek? It's true that I may resemble this Ashura guy, but I'm a lot different from him. I'm stupid and a brat, and there's still a whole lot I don't understand. But I know what it is for someone to be my friend, and I want to protect them, that's all. Said Naruto. If that is your answer, then let me tell you this. Once before I couldn't do anything as Indra turned upon Ashura. That is where this entire calamity began. Give me your hands as now Naruto and Sasuke. What you two do and what will happen from this point on all depends on you. Unbeknownst to each other in their inner worlds, both Naruto and Sasuke raised their hands as they were blessed by the sage. Naruto's right and Sasuke left. However, the sage, aware of what else was happening, knew the abilities would not activate for some time, and as such did a little bit of tweaking. What do you mean tweaking? What did that old man do? Questioned Naruto, sitting up from his seat, his eyes wide. It doesn't say, just moves on to a new scene. Said Sakura, causing Naruto to grit his teeth in irritation. Sarutobi Hiruzen panted as he eyed the still form of the beast that towered over him. He didn't know why, but all of a sudden the massive creature had suddenly frozen in place, its eyes unblinking. However, instead of ordering an immediate attack and forcing it back into its senses, he quickly ordered his men to evacuate the wounded to a safer location. Suddenly and without warning, Namikaze Minato had made his appearance, and disappeared with the fox by way of the Hiraishin no Jutsu. Gathering a selection of men, he raced out towards where the fox could be seen in the distance. Elsewhere, as Minato and the fox appeared from the quick jump, the fox was suddenly snapped back into reality. However, before anything could be done, golden chains were suddenly wrapping around it to hold it in place. Startled by the sight, Minato snapped around to come face to face with his wife Kushina, who was restraining the fox with her chakra chains, yet holding their newborn son in hand. The fox, however, was snapped out of its frozen state at the action, and in its confused state lashed out upon seeing the baby being placed within the ceremonial altar. Unfortunately, by the time the fox regained its self-awareness completely, what it didn't want to happen had happened, as both Namikaze Minato and Uzumaki Kushina had jumped forward to shield their child from the attack. While he managed to stop it short, Namikaze Minato had still been stabbed rather deeply by the fox's claw. Minato, unknowing of the change that had come over the fox, made his move, his hands flying through seals at a blistering rate before they froze on the last one, which were having his hands clasped together. As his chakra charged the attack, the transparent figure of the Shinigami made its appearance behind the blonde male. Knowing what would happen, the fox didn't fight the pull, however was surprised when instead of pulling out his entire essence, he only lost the single tail, which was somehow severed, while the rest fell back into the fox. Minato in his pain rushed sealed within himself, while the rest of the fox was sealed into Naruto. Its job done, the Shinigami blinked out of existence. This was the scene that the Sandaime and his entourage stumbled onto. However, while most of them had missed it, Minato had seen the form of an old man suddenly appear and sever the fox's chakra tail, while throwing the rest back in. No one would ever know this tidbit, however, as he collapsed at just that moment. So it appearance, instead of allowing you to split the fox, the Rikudo Sennin interfered in the ritual. Said Hiruzen after a moment. Yeah, Kurama only lost a single tail. That could be regenerated soon enough. Said Naruto. At the same time, within the deeper layers of the seal, the 16-year-old Naruto suddenly sat up with a gasp, his hands immediately going about patting himself down while his eyes were frantically darting over his surroundings. It didn't take him long to realize where he was, especially as he spied the form of the Kyuubi locked behind the barred doors of its cage. Kurama, what's going on? Why are you in a cage? Questioned the blonde in confusion. You died, brat. Madara managed to extract my chakra from you. As the fox said this, Naruto suddenly doubled over as the memories of his last moments hit him full force. He and Madara had been looked in a tug-of-war over the fox's chakra. For a while he had held firm until White Setsu had emerged with a Rinnegan eye that Obito had hidden away, which had resulted in boosting Madara's power, allowing him to rip the fox's chakra from him easily. Wait a minute, I thought you said I died long before this stuff could have happened. Said Obito in confusion. Could it be a different Obito? Questioned Ino, turning to Shikamaru. It could be, said the Nara heir, though clearly still thinking about it. As for why we are where we are, you have me to thank for that. Before he passed, Father taught us all a special technique. I was the only one who managed to grasp it completely. I'm sure you can grasp the nature of this technique due to your trip to Rorin, stated Kurama. Time travel? Questioned the blonde in surprise. While he hadn't initially remembered his trip to the past when he had first broken the seal and gained unrestricted access to the fox's power, he had been able to remember why. He had felt that girl he met in the ruins of Rorin had seemed so familiar. She was Sarah's daughter. So you've taken us back into the past, stated Naruto after a few moments. In a way, what I did was using my chakra as an anchor. I took our souls into time/space, which enabled us to settle in our younger bodies. Somehow, however, the technique was more powerful than I planned on it being. Instead of around 9 years like I had planned, we have gone back a full 16 to the day of your birth and my initial sealing. However, while all of our memories are intact, you will find that you will have to retrain this body, only this time you'll have people who will be able to aid you with that, as I managed to not kill your mother this time around. I brought your friends back with us, even that Hyuga brat. However, as a trade-off for this I had to use up all of my power, so I need to rest. Don't screw things up, Gaki. Naruto watched as in moments of closing his eyes the great beast had fallen into a deep sleep. In fact, he found that it was such a good idea that he immediately copied the action, and entering the cage he fell asleep into the fox's side, nestled deeply in soft fur. An action that at this moment the majority of his friends were copying at this point. So we're all sleeping with the fox? Questioned Choji, confused. No, we're all settling into our younger bodies. Because technically most of us would be babies at that time, our older selves are most likely sleeping until a feasible time for them to awaken, said Ino. Makes sense. It would probably take years for any of you to actually awaken into the new bodies, said Inoichi. That long? Questioned Kiba in surprise. Well, would you like to relive being a toddler and be able to remember every embarrassing moment? Questioned Inoichi. I hope I sleep until at least 7, muttered Kiba. The Sandame and the newly widowed wife of the Yandame and her newborn found themselves along with many others within the council chamber. Along with them were the heads of the various clans of the village, which was now under lockdown. Several of the heads had been forced to bring their children as their significant others, along with just about every other member of their clans, were out helping to find survivors and aid the wounded. As it was, Kushina had only just finished explaining to the council what it was that had truly happened. For a while everyone was silent as they all absorbed what the young woman had told them and tried to come to terms with what it could mean. So what now? Questioned Akimichi Chuza as he looked around the room. For now the village will be under lockdown for a while longer. I want the Hyuga, Inuzuka, and Aburame clans to head up the search for survivors. For the foreseeable future there will be an increased presence from both the ANBU and the military police. For now any missions under B rank will be suspended until we can get the village affairs back in order, stated Hiruzen, getting understanding nods all around. What of the masked man? Questioned Inoichi. Unfortunately there is not much we can do about him at the moment. The fact that he possessed the time/space technique puts us at a distinct disadvantage when it comes to tracking him. He could be anywhere as we have no clue as to the range of his technique. Furthermore, the fact that he had the Sharingan is troubling. However, the fact that he only showed one eye means he lacks a second one, which states that more likely than not it's a transplant. All we know at this point is his height, hair color, and he is most likely in possession of a stolen Sharingan eye. We'll put him in the bingo book, but with as little as we know about him he can easily disappear. As Hiruzen finished and looked around the room, he could tell no one liked what he had said. However, everyone understood the truth of the matter was that the guy was an unknown, and due to his style of dress it would be easy for him to vanish and remain undetected, simply by changing his clothes and changing the covering over his eyes position-wise. For the time being I want us to focus our efforts on recovery. The treatment of our wounded and the rebuilding of the damaged section of the village will be our top priority for the time being, said the Hokage. Chapter's over, said Sakura, standing and placing the book down on the desk, leaving it open face down. Chapter 2. Started Rin, causing several people to either lean forward in anticipation or back in order to relax. It was a cloudy, snowy day in the Hidden Leaf village. Despite the early hour and weather, however, people were already up and going about their business, either heading out or heading home, as a shinobi village like Konoha could never be fully asleep. Deeper within the forest area surrounding the village, outside of a large house, the sitting form of a child could be found. The child in question was young, not even 10 years old, and had bright blonde hair, though red strands could be seen littered within and 3 linear markings on each cheek, resembling whiskers. He wore a pair of black pants, and a long-sleeved white shirt with a large version of the small flame that was Konoha's symbol upon its front. Those who knew the child would be surprised at the sight of the ball of energy being so still and quiet. However, this was not the child they knew, not completely. No, the person currently in deep meditation was at one point the Gamma Sennin, Konoha's most powerful Jounin Uzumaki Naruto. Wait, did that say Jounin? Questioned Sakura in shock. I gave him a field promotion when he headed for the front lines, said Tsunade, surprising many people due to the rarity of field promotions. At the moment he was using his mediation in order to aid him in sorting out his memories. Having mastered the shadow clone technique at the young age of 12, he was an old hand at sorting out memories. Though only 7 years old now and lacking his gargantuan chakra reserves, he was an Uzumaki, and thus still had enough for 20 clones. Of course he was different than he was before due to a combination of factors, one of which was his general treatment. Unlike before when people had outright hated him without even meeting him, now most people generally liked him, or were at least neutral. The reason for this was that his mother hadn't allowed the Sandaime to hide his heritage. People still knew he was a Jinchuriki, yet now he was also the son of their beloved Yondaime. Thankfully that wasn't what won people over. It was the fact that he was generally a happy and kind child and that he had a rather large and powerful family at his back. That of course was yet another difference. Whereas before he'd grown up alone, this time his mother had survived, and with that one change the thought to be extinct Uzumaki clan had arrived in droves, arriving from all over the continent, and even from across the seas where a vast number had fled during the sacking of Uzushio. They'd started arriving when he was 4 and more were still arriving. The addition of the Uzumaki clan, though small at the moment numbering 50, had still added a measure of power to the village that had been missing ever since the Kyuubi attack. In his original timeline, when is everyone else going to wake up, thought the blonde for what had to have been the 1000th time this year alone. He himself had been awake for 3 years now, though not of his doing. In truth, his awakening had been forced, the result of another divergence. In this instance it had been the result of what was called the Kumo incident, where under the guise of a peace treaty signing, the ambassador for Kumo had attempted to abduct the 4-year-old boy. They what? Exclaimed Kushina, causing several people who knew her to back away slowly, as the woman's rage had become as legendary as Tsunade's strength. Only a few people noticed the reactions this caused from Niji and Hinata. Of course this was a huge difference, as in the original timeline he hadn't been the target. Instead it had been Hinata. Only her father had intervened and killed her would-be abductor, consequently allowing the Raikage to demand the Hyuga head's own head, and more importantly his eyes, in exchange for peace. This led to the Hyuga elders going around him and allowing the man's brother Hazashi to sacrifice himself, triggering the activation of the caged bird seal and thus the destruction of his eyes. This had consequently caused the rift between the two houses to become a chasm and instilled within Niji an intense hatred of the main house, to the point that the 14-year-old Niji had attempted to kill Hinata during the Chunin exam preliminary round. At these words several people frowned, none more so than the Hyuga in attendance. All of them knew that the internal policies of the Hyuga needed work, but they hadn't thought it was this bad. This time, however, that hadn't happened. Instead, the son of the Yondaime Hokage had been the target of the Raikage's greed. While the man managed to infiltrate their home and drug the boy to ensure he stayed asleep, that had been his undoing. His body had responded by trying to burn through the drug, tugging on the fox's chakra in the process, and thus waking him up. Kurama, being who he was, had responded to the threat the only way he knew how: force. From what he had managed to learn later, the chakra, malice and killing intent that had been released had been felt throughout the entirety of Hai no Kuni. More importantly, it had woken him up and he'd been pissed. By the time the Sandaime, his mother, the rest of the council, and a literal battalion of ANBU arrived on the scene, the man had been bloodied, battered and broken, yet still alive and wishing he wasn't. He, however, hadn't been fine. Having been forcibly awakened years ahead of schedule had forced him into a coma. Well, that and the overuse of a chakra network that had been overstressed. When he awoke 2 weeks later, both Jiraiya and Tsunade had been there. Apparently what no one else could do in getting the legendary medic to come back, his mother could, and quite easily. They had explained that the fox had awakened them almost as soon as they had been close to him. Learning that bastard Kabuto had Edo Tensei Jiraiya had been enough to send both blondes into a rage. Such was the scene that was happening now, as could been seen in the murderous expressions on the faces of the two. It took several minutes to calm the two, as they had both clearly inherited the Uzumaki clan's famed temper, and that would easily set it off. After they had spent time talking with Naruto giving his report on his actions during the war, the two Sannin had assured the blonde they'd be staying in the village for a while. Kakashi, who'd been living with him, and his mom had been away on a mission, however he had been restored immediately upon his return. Once the fox had been secure in his protection, he'd gone back to sleep. His mother, however, had been on a warpath. Not only had someone tried and nearly succeeded in kidnapping her son, but his ANBU guards had been conspicuously absent. By the time he was released from the hospital, the Uzumaki clan had started arriving in droves. At least the night hadn't been completely bad, mused the blonde as he stood to his feet, casually holding his right arm out, palm open, only for a burst of golden energy to shoot out of it and solidify into a spear-tipped length of chain. Here Rin was forced to stop as Kushina squealed loudly and pounced on her son, hugging him with all she had. "I can't believe it, you did it!" exclaimed the woman, a bright grin on her face, while Naruto himself had been rendered speechless. "What's going on?" questioned Kiba, though his question went unanswered as Kushina was smiling brightly, at least before Rin gasped, bringing the room's attention back to her. Seeing this, she decided to continue reading. The Kungokusa, adamant attacking chains, had manifested themselves that night, and while not as powerful as his mother's Kungo Fuza, adamant sealing chains, were still not to be trifled with. Of course he'd been shocked when he'd first discovered the ability, having never manifested it originally. Tsunade had also been surprised and had personally run his medical exam, and had yet again been surprised. Some things she had expected, such as the fact he was completely healthy, having grown up under the care of his mother, and Kakashi he was not suffering from malnutrition as he had the first time through. What had surprised her had been in his blood work. Specifically, the Uzumaki bloodline was active. The very bloodline that had allowed Uzumaki Mito to live until well into the reign of the Sandaime Hokage and allowed his mother to survive the extraction of a bijou Having had his own bijou extracted during the war, he knew firsthand how incredible that was in itself. He himself had nearly died that time, but Sakura had literally pumped his heart herself, and had blown air into his lungs. If not for that, he doubted he'd have ever made it to this point. Sakura blushed as several people turned to look at her at this point, and seeing the thankful look from her teammates' parents made her feel good inside, though she was horrified that such a thing had happened to Naruto of all people. Though she hadn't really put much thought to it, her teammate had become the one person she thought was unbeatable, especially since Naruto didn't lose when it actually mattered. Still, the fact was he hadn't had the ability the first time around. He'd had the Uzumaki vitality obviously, but the chains were a new one. His mom had been ecstatic from this news, as apparently in the history of the Uzumaki only 4 males had awakened it before him. At this news, several people could see why Kushina had reacted the way she had. They'd heard of selective bloodlines, but they'd never heard of one with such a rare selection among males. Still, to this day, both he and the old lady wondered what had caused it to awaken this time around, as both could think of numerous other occasions where it could have done so, but hadn't. Jiraiya had said it could just be the fact he'd been breastfed this time around. Tsunade had of course punched the man out of the room and clear across the village for the comment, but then she'd got this thoughtful look on her face, and he decided he didn't really care how anymore. He blinked as he came out of his thoughts, finding himself coming upon the site of the memorial stone. His eyes almost immediately found the name of his father Namake's Minato, just under that of Senju Tobarama, the title of Yondaime Hokage etched into the stone beside his name. Hey Pop, it's been a while. I know I said that I'd be patient and wait, but it's been 3 years already. Kakashi says things are going just like last time, and people are starting to blame the Uchiha clan as a whole for the attack. The Uchiha themselves have withdrawn into the compound. Even Mikoto Oba-san doesn't come around as often anymore. Itachi and Shursui have become distant as well. I need to do something. I can't let all of those people die for one man's hatred and another's greed. The Uchiha massacre had never sat right with him. When he'd first heard about it, even before he'd first met Sasuke, it had felt like someone had stabbed him in the gut. Learning the truth behind the massacre, however, had only upset him more. The loss of life was needless. He could understand getting rid of some, but every man, woman, and child, many of whom had been civilians, there had been no reason for it. As if that wasn't bad enough for Danzo to sweep in and disrespect their corpses as he had, well, Sasuke could always be forgiven for killing the man for that crime. What crime? What the hell did he do? Questioned Fugaku. In the aftermath of the massacre, while everyone's attention was elsewhere, Danzo managed to steal a collection of Sharingan eyes. One he kept in his right eye socket, while he had 11 embedded into an artificial arm. Stated Sasuke, causing everyone's eyes to widen with the exception of Naruto, who had merely looked down, his hair shadowing his face. Fugaku meanwhile was livid, his eyes bleeding into a fully matured Sharingan with the tomos spinning furiously. For the past 3 years he had done his best to come up with some kind of strategy to change that one event. Unfortunately in this case he was not a Nara, and it was a Nara brain that he needed to come up with a way to effectively save an entire clan from death. He'd thought of multiple ways he could interfere, but had eventually discarded all of them for one reason or another. For one, he was once again a 7-year-old brat, and while he was better trained and far more knowledgeable than before, the fact remains he was still a 7-year-old brat. I wish I could say that was the only thing on my mind lately, but it's not. The dream started back up last night, but I guess you probably already figured that out, though, considering how early it is. You know, when Old Man Sage first told me I was the reincarnation of his son, I didn't believe it. No, it's not I didn't, but that I didn't want to. All my life I struggled just to be Naruto, and not the demon brat. The dreams, though, they've shown me so much. I can say now I know more about Hashirama than anyone ever has or ever will. I know how he fought, how he thought, I know his techniques. More than that, I know he felt, how he cried for every life lost due to the clan wars. I know how Konoha was born a dream of 2 boys, and my heart aches for how far we have fallen from that path. I know of Ashura and the struggles he faced, and just like Hashirama, I know everything there is to know about him. I even know what it was that caused the feud between the Senju and Uchiha that led to the clan wars. I've seen Nishu at its purest before it was warped into ninjutsu, and it saddens me that, like chakra, something created to help the world and bring us together has been corrupted into little more than a weapon. Despite this feeling, however, he often wondered if it had been inevitable that chakra would become such a thing. Seeing the lives of his 2 most powerful predecessors along with a few more over the years had him come to the conclusion that an everlasting peace was simply impossible. Conflict and violence were sadly too great a part of human nature for any sort of peace to last forever. The Otsutsuki family had only ensured peace for 3 generations before the peace was broken once more, and even that peace was the longest than any that had come before or after that time. His thoughts on the matter, however, were brought to a halt as a presence registered to his senses. Looking up, he was greeted to the sight of his godfather Jiraiya. Unlike the first time through, the man had made it a point to be around as much as possible. That isn't to say he was always around, as the man's duties still kept him busy, but he would at least come to check up on the blonde every chance he got, which was more than could be said for the first time around. Wait a minute, are you telling me that you didn't check up on him once during his childhood? Demanded Kushina, turning angered eyes on the Toad Sage, who inwardly shivered at the hostility aimed in his direction. I couldn't personally. Sensei kept me far too busy for that. However, I had the Toads checking up on him periodically. Stated Jiraiya. So if he wasn't with you, who the hell was raising him? demanded the woman. Sensei decided against my judgment, mind you, that it would be in everyone's best interest if he was placed in the orphanage. Kakashi was deemed unfit due to his age and connection to Minato, and he vetoed my idea to let Tsunade raise him. Explained Jiraiya. What about Hitomi, or Mikoto or Tsum? Exclaimed the woman, throwing out the names of her 3 closest friends. Somewhere along the lines, and I'm not sure how, it was decided that none of the clans could take him in as it would upset the balance of power. Aside from that, the Uchiha were under a lot of heat due to the Kyuubi attack and the belief that one of their members caused it, and the Hyuga have the caged bird seal. Stated Jiraiya. Is there anything else you'd like to let us know? Stated Minato, his eyes lacking the usual warmth they were known for. Sensei also allowed the council to know that the fox was sealed inside Naruto, and the council decided to inform the villagers. Eventually the knowledge was declared an S-rank secret, but the damage had already been done. Stated Jiraiya, causing Kushina to gasp in horror. He sacrificed my son. Stated Minato, an oppressive feeling overcoming the room. He made a mistake. Stated Jiraiya, frowning. It was no mistake, Sensei. He knew exactly what would happen once that information was spread. You only have to remember Tsukumo to realize what could go wrong, and the only thing he did was sacrifice a mission. No, this was a strategic move. He used Naruto as a deterrent to the other villages with the knowledge that the Kyuubi had been sealed. It bought time for the village, but it ensured Naruto would grow up alone. My guess is he told no one that Naruto was our son, and even forbid that knowledge from leaking out from those who knew. That said, those who knew were instead forced to keep their distance for one reason or another, ensuring once again that Naruto grew up alone. Stated Minato, a glare locked onto his predecessor, who was frowning. While your suspicions are true, it was not the Sandaime that is at fault. Stated Itachi in his usual monotone, catching the room's attention. In truth, the night of the attack, Sandaime-sama was not the only one to witness your sacrifice. Danzo was also there with a small squad of his own. However, instead of initiating a confrontation, one of his agents placed the Sandaime under a Sharingan-induced genjutsu. The jutsu resulted in the Sandaime making the best decisions for Konoha always when Naruto was involved. He had hoped that by keeping Naruto alone and isolated he would come to resent the villagers and be easily manipulated. That was just one of the things I learned about him prior to my leaving Konoha. Said Itachi, causing several to frown, and after a few moments Rin went back to reading just to get away from the negative subject. I figured I'd find you here. Stated the Sannin, eyeing the form of his last apprentice. I just needed some time to clear my head. Said Naruto. Don't tell me you're worried about the academy. Stated Jiraiya, causing the blonde to snort. I can handle that just fine. It's just something that Obito said that's been bugging me. Stated Naruto, causing the Sannin to turn serious in an instant. Obito, it was a name that brought nothing but bitterness out of the Sannin. He'd seen the kid more than a few times while he was growing up, but if he'd known how he would turn out, he'd have killed him back then himself, and made sure the job was done. At this point the Sannin didn't care what was said. The fact was that Obito had cost Minato his life. Along with many others, he'd never get anything but a swift, brutal death from the Sannin. You know, he was there when Rin died. Stated Naruto, causing Jiraiya to frown. This, however, caused Rin's voice to hitch while the rest of Team Minato went wide-eyed in shock. Several noticed that the older version of Kakashi had stiffened noticeably, which caused several people to narrow their eyes. Before that point, everything he'd been hearing he'd taken with a grain of salt. Sure, Madara had healed him and kept him from dying, but he was still loyal to Konoha. However, on that day Madara discovered that Rin and Kakashi were being pursued by a squad of Kiri-nin, and Obito managed to persuade him to let him go help. Obito arrived just in time to learn that Kiri had sealed the Sanbai inside of her with a faulty seal, and the group chasing them was just for show. It stunned him just long enough for Rin to convince Kakashi to kill her. No, there is no way that's true, exclaimed Obito, shaking his head rapidly in denial. Rin herself was no better now, sitting stock still, the book having slipped out of her hands in her shock, and a lone tear slid down her face. Kushina, seeing this, moved from her seat and pulled the young Kunoichi into a hug, whispering into the unresponsive girl's ear. The young Kakashi, however, had also gone rigid, his eyes locked onto the form of his older self, who had slumped over as depression settled over him. Minato, however, had clenched his fist, his eyes becoming glacial and his body vibrating due to the intensity of his rage. Kushina, seeing all of this, reached down and picked up the book, scanning it for a few moments before picking off where Rin left off. I remember that time. Minato was a wreck, and Kakashi, well, that's what broke him, said Jiraiya after a few moments. But don't you think it's odd? Not only was she the student of a seal master, but she lived in a village that 3 of the best in the world called home. All they had to do was get one of you 3 to secure the seal and she'd have been fine. Yet Rin pressured Kakashi into using the Chidori on her, stated the blonde, getting the Sannin to narrow his eyes in thought. Likewise, in the real world, several sets of eyes had narrowed as people thought over the situation from what they now knew and determined it was indeed an oddity. What are you getting at? Questioned Jiraiya, causing Naruto to sigh as he looked down upon the name on the memorial stone. I don't think that was Rin at all. In fact, I'm positive it wasn't. I'm equally positive she's still alive. What? Came the exclamation from several people at once, causing Kushina to giggle slightly and continue when people looked at her. What? Questioned Jiraiya in surprise. You weren't around anymore, so let me fill you in. During the war, the enemy unleashed a horde of white Setsu. They were plant-like creatures that had the ability to transform perfectly into anyone they chose. The enemy used them to strike out at the allied forces from within and wreaked havoc with our troops because they copied everything perfectly, including scent and chakra signatures. I believe Madara sacrificed one, having it masquerade as Rin just long enough to get a Beto there, and witness Kakashi strike a killing blow. I see, you think Madara used her death in order to break a Beto. Having witnessed Kakashi killing their teammate, it would have seemed at least to a Beto that he was betrayed first, said Jiraiya, frowning thoughtfully. There's no record of an autopsy being performed on Rin. In fact, from what I learned, she was declared Kia and her body was unable to be recovered, said Naruto, causing Jiraiya to grimace. He knew exactly where the body was, Minato having shown him the girl's burial site. However, during the midst of the war, the council had taken charge and released the cover story, not wanting word of what happened to the girl to leak out. Minato and Kakashi had both been sworn to secrecy, but had been encouraged to take their rage out on the enemy. Plus, don't you think it odd that the same thing could happen to the same person twice? Questioned Naruto, catching the Sanin's attention. Initially, what started all this was the team being ambushed and Rin taken captive, right? I know it was wartime, but I don't think the exact same thing could happen twice to the same person, said Naruto, once again causing Jiraiya to frown in thought. You're saying they were set up, said Jiraiya after a few moments. I'm saying they were sold out. There were 4 people on that mission, yet I can find no mention of the other members in the records. Son of a bitch. I knew it. I told Sensei he should have killed him, had been telling him for years, but did he listen? Of course not, exclaimed Jiraiya, punching a wall, causing it to crater with his anger, at least before the wall repaired itself. Would you like to share with the rest of us? Questioned Tsunade, raising an eyebrow at the outburst. He doesn't need to, it tells us, said Kushina, catching the room's attention. Danzo. Now that he thought about it, with everything that he knew about the man and his deeds, he realized that the situation had Danzo's fingerprints all over it. He was the only one who would go to such lengths inside the village. He didn't even need to think long on why. He knew what was coming up, and he knew about that arm the man had managed to get, and the eye that had been placed in his skull. Rin was the only one outside of Tsunade he could think of capable of transplanting Sharingan eyes out of a physically unstable Uchiha safely. For just that alone, Danzo would leap at the opportunity to lay claim on the girl. Don't tell anyone else of what you've come up with. I'll look into it, said the Toad Sage before he marched off, his face a mask of determination. Okay, how do you know about Danzo's Sharingan arm? Questioned Tsunade. I most likely told him, stated Naruto, catching the room's attention. But how do you know? We only just found out, said Sakura. Because not that long ago, Itachi's Edo Tensei told me, stated the blonde, shocking everyone. Meanwhile, fully recovered Rin accepted the book back from Kushina in order to continue. While Jiraiya and Naruto were having this deep conversation elsewhere, another young child could be seen overlooking a lake which had been frozen over from his position upon a small pier. This child had black hair with a hint of blue in it, which was spiked up in the back, while his bangs hung above his black eyes. Due to the current weather, he wore a simple long-sleeved black shirt with a raised collar, and the Uchiha crest on the back, and black pants. For several moments he was still before he took in a deep breath, and his hands flew through long-since memorized seals before leaping into the air and taking a deep intake of air, causing his chest to stick out. Katon, Gokaki no Jutsu, Fire Release, Great Fireball Technique. As the words echoed through his mind, he exhaled, spewing forth a massive ball of fire several times bigger than he himself was, which slammed into the frozen over lake with force. He eyed the ball of flames dispassionately, at least before his vision clouded over due to the steam released by the newly thawed lake. Dipping his hand inside the water, he found that it was now warm enough to swim in, though he would do no such thing. Impressive, Sasuke, as expected of my son, came a voice, catching the child's attention. Sasuke didn't even turn to face the man as he came to stand beside him. At one point he had yearned for the man's attention, however, ever since his awakening a year ago, he had realized how unimportant such a thing was. In fact, now that he could know the man without the rose-tinted vision of a child, he was disappointed with this fool of a man. At these words, the boy's parents went wide-eyed in shock, while the teen in question had no change in emotion or posture, having placed himself in what Naruto called his brooding position some time ago. As someone who had initially grown up living by what his father believed, seeing him now left him with a bitter taste in his mouth. This man who had boasted about the superiority of the Uchiha over everyone else was in his eyes a weakling. Yes, the man had a fully mature Sharingan, however Sasuke had realized without that he'd just be some run-of-the-mill shinobi, perhaps not even a jounin. Sasuke himself had been stronger at 15 without his Sharingan than this man was now with it. Let's not even get into what he could do with his Mangekyo. What made it worse was the fact that the man thought that his children had inherited their power from him. Yet their mother was clearly the more powerful and talented of the two. At these words, said father slumped in his seat while the mother blushed prettily, and Itachi simply nodded, confirming the words. Of course, his irritation with the man wasn't just due to that. It also came from the fact that he had realized what point of time he was in, and how much he had left to stop the idiocy of his clan. He had tried several subtle things in order to manipulate the situation, all of which had been met in failure. Of course, he realized now that he wasn't really good at subtle. As obsessed as he'd been about vengeance in his first life, he'd focused more on gaining more powerful techniques, and not the more subtle things that he could have learned. Hindsight, of course, was always a bitch when one realized their mistakes or limitations and realized it was their own damned fault. The academy enrollment begins in an hour, are you prepared? Questioned Fugaku. Fugaku nodded at the Uchiha answer for yes. While Sasuke inwardly sighed, now that he had some clue of his talent and ability, the man had decided that he was worthy enough for his attention. He tried to get him enrolled a few years ago only to be denied, as the Sandaime had decided due to the peacetime that they didn't need such young shinobi for the time being, and was content to let the kids enjoy their childhoods. He'd even stopped the early graduation, something that his father occasionally gripped about these days. Sasuke himself didn't really look forward to the academy that much these days. As far as he was concerned, all its approach meant to him was that he was coming closer to being an orphan again, and that pissed him off since the vast majority of his clan, including his mother, he actually liked. It was for this reason he'd focused so much of his time training. While he knew he was nowhere near his previous S-class ability, he would settle for just being strong enough to protect his mother and some others. Knowing now that his brother hadn't meant for the entire clan to be wiped out the first time through, and that the masked bastard had done it himself, had been enough of a motivation to push himself. Turning away from the lake, the boy decided to make his way towards the academy, stuffing his hands in his pants pockets on the way. So his basic brooding emo pose, stated Kiba, causing the other members of the 12 to chuckle. It hadn't taken Naruto long to make it to the academy. Having spent as much time in the building as he had both in the learning center and the Hokage's office, he knew all of the routes to getting there throughout the entirety of the village. As his feet carried him, he had allowed his mind to wander over various subjects through the time he'd been walking. His most predominant thought was if he'd be placed in the same class as his friends, as he hadn't been the first time. Sure, they had all been first years, but there had been so many students the first time through that there had been a bunch of separate classes. Everyone in his original class had washed out. Had there really been that many students? Questioned Sakura in shock. Yeah, there were 4 classes. Everyone from your class had some kind of prominent lineage or had been related to shinobi in some way. Everyone in my class, well, we were your complete opposite, said Naruto. What's that supposed to mean? Questioned Ino. It tells us, said Rin, causing Naruto's eyes to widen in shock. Of course, that was to be expected. The graduating class was usually Class 1, the advanced class who had better teachers and learned advanced material to supplement what they already knew from their own upbringing. Class 2 was where the notable civilian students were, and of that lot less than half usually graduated. Classes 3 and 4 were the statistics. They were the ones with no notable lineage or hint of promise, and the ones most likely to wash out. Class 4, which had been his initial class, was the worst, receiving just the minimal amount of attention and knowledge from the teacher, as they were all expected to wash out. Most people from this class wound up right back where they started, with the girls becoming working girls in the various brothels and clubs that dotted Konoha's red light district. Most of the boys usually became either conmen, stick-up kids, thieves, or pushers. If you were lucky enough, you could be taken in by one of the families that controlled the place, which offered some measure of protection. He himself had been everything under the sun, having been kicked out of the orphanage at 4 when he'd been forced to learn the tricks of the trade. Of course, he had also never envisioned becoming a shinobi. By the time he was 7, he had been particularly well known in the underworld and had been one of the biggest names around. At these words, Naruto's usual expression could be nowhere found on his face. Instead, his expression was neutral enough to even impress the Hyuga in attendance. While he hadn't been part of any of the families, he had not made enemies with them either. In truth, many of the heads had been impressed by the boy due both to the speed that he had risen in status and his methods of getting things done. That said, they had also been quite pleased with his sense of independence, and he'd heard later on that he'd have even been given his own family had he not left the game behind. So what was it that had changed his course and made him change his own ways? In this case, it would be a completely random circumstance. He'd decided rather spur of the moment to take a day off. He'd gone off to check with one of his friends when what happens? They get fucking arrested. You got arrested? Exclaimed Kushina in shock. Yeah, not one of my better memories, said Naruto, rubbing the back of his head in his patented embarrassed habit. His friend Kuma, they'd called him mostly due to his size and strength, had simply slipped up. He'd been in possession of 3 pounds of opium and 6 stacks of 20,000 yen notes. He'd been in the midst of a delivery when Naruto had flagged him down, and before they knew it, the Uchiha MPs had surrounded them. Because Kuma had only been a transporter and had taken the full heat without a fight, they'd let him off easy, but he still had to do a 5 to 7 stretch. Naruto had been let go free and clear, but had been stopped by the lead officer at the time, Uchiha Shursui, who had convinced him to apply for the academy. Initially, he decided to ignore the advice. He didn't want to be a shinobi, and he had his own business ventures to look into. Shursui, however, had been persistent, checking up on him every other week for 3 months until eventually he had worn him down, and he'd agreed. He, of course, was never one to do something half-assed, and decided that he would put his full effort into things, leaving everything in the hands of his second. He'd walked away from the life. In hindsight, walking away when he did was the best thing he could have done. What he did before was nowhere near as much fun as he'd had as a shinobi. Gaki, just what in the hell were you doing? Questioned Tsunade, frowning. At that point, I had a lot going on. One of them was working under the guy in charge of all the gambling in Konoha, collections, payouts, all of the books, said Naruto with a smirk, causing several people to go wide-eyed. Really? Questioned the Godane with a raised eyebrow. Aren't you glad that your debt collectors just disappeared even though they know where you are? Said the blonde. You bought out her debts? exclaimed Jiraiya in shock. Yup, cost me 3 million and I had to promise not to play in any gambling den in Hino Kuni for 5 years. Stated Naruto with a shrug. His thoughts on the matter, however, were brought to a halt as he came across a scene that gave him pause. A trio of boys could be seen standing over the smaller form of a young girl. Who are you and what are you doing here? Questioned one of the boys. Your eyes are kind of creepy. You must be some kind of night monster. Said another, causing Naruto to frown as the girl started trembling softly. Alright, what do you jerks think you're doing? Questioned Naruto as he made his presence known to the group. His approach was made quickly as he put himself in front of the girl who had huddled over on herself, and shaking badly. Picking on girls, you bastards need to learn some manners. Stated the young blonde. Mind your own business, punk. Stated another, taking what he thought was a threatening step forward. And if I don't? In the next moment, he had his answer as one of the three he was guessing the leader rushed him with a wild overhand punch. Knocking the attack aside easily, he retaliated quickly, slamming his own fist into the boy's nose and watching with an odd sense of satisfaction as he dropped to the ground like a puppet with its strings cut. Upon seeing this, the other two looked at him wide-eyed before turning tail and running as fast as the snow-covered ground would let them. That was oddly therapeutic, said the blonde, turning back towards the ground only to be met by the smiling face of Hyuga Hinata. Well, looks like you won this time, Naruto-kun, said the girl before being pulled into a tight hug by the blonde. 20 minutes later and the duo could still be found in the same spot, sitting with their backs to a tree. Hinata had spent the time telling him all about her new life and the changes that had come about. First and foremost, with her uncle still alive, things between her and Niji were much better, and Niji had slipped into his protector role years earlier than he had before. Another change was that her mother had also survived childbirth this time around. At these words, the Hyuga head's eyes had widened and the mother in question had gasped audibly, only to quickly be comforted by Kushina, Sim and Mikoto, who had almost immediately leapt to her side. Of course, Naruto had already known this bit. He was much closer to the Hyuga now than in his first life, and he knew that his mother and Hinata's were very close. Still, he said nothing as he had never heard Hinata talk so much before, especially about her home life. Still, learning the particulars about this particular case had stunned him. Not so much the woman surviving her second time giving birth, but the reason behind her health problems. Apparently her mother had been slipped some kind of poison that had slowly weakened her. Only this time, instead of succumbing to it, Tsunade had been around and ensured that the woman survived. The result of this was a much closer relationship between the head family of the Hyuga. With the survival of both his brother and his wife, Hayashi hadn't shut out his emotions and cared for more than just the clan's image. The result of having two parents who apparently cared could be seen in changes to both of their daughters. Hinata was much more outgoing than before, and with the smile she wore now, well, it was no surprise that Naruto thought that she was the prettiest of his friends. At these words, Hinata began blushing hotly, her face turning a very dark shade of red at her crush's thoughts to her appearance. Thankfully, before the girl could overheat and her body force another cool down by way of a fainting spell, Kurenai had reminded the girl of her presence. Before long, however, the two had to put their catching up on hold as they noticed people beginning to arrive and head inside. As he looked upon the board for the directions for which class he would be joining, Naruto found yet another divergence. As he looked upon the names of people he knew, he found many of them were in different classes than they had been in the first run-through. Surprisingly enough, his entire first class had been mixed in with classes 1 and 2. All of the clan heirs were off course in class 1, and he was slightly surprised to find his own name was listed there as well. Of course, he had no way of knowing that this was in fact a direct result of the fox freezing in mid-rampage. Many people who otherwise would have perished had been spared death's embrace on that night. While some had passed on over the years to follow anyway, many were still among the living. This meant that the shinobi weren't as badly affected as the first time, and unlike in his original life, the civilian council had not been able to lay claim to the academy. Now, instead of people that would have otherwise been pushed through due to family relations, those with the most potential for the life were placed in those spots. I see you noticed it too. Came a new yet very familiar voice. Turning towards it, Naruto was greeted to the sight of Abirame Shino walking up to stand on the other side of Hinata, making Naruto absently realize that Shino was always on her left when he saw them together. He also noticed absently that almost immediately as settled did a single bug settle itself in the hood of Hinata's jacket, going unnoticed only due to the fact that Hinata had pulled him into a one-armed hug. It's good to see you again, Shino, said the blonde, returning his sights to the board. You as well, come, the others are waiting. So how long have you been awake? Questioned the blonde as he made his way through the halls with his friends. Apparently we all awoke this morning, though the times varied, stated the Abirame heir. So the fox said it so we would all awaken when the academy started? Stated Sakura in a questioning tone. It makes sense. Around that time all of us were offered a bit more leeway from our clans, stated Shikamaru, frowning. Still, man, another 5 years in the academy, after you've already graduated and been a Chunin, said Kiba with a grimace. Well, at least it's extra time to train right. With the time we have, we could all be much stronger than we were the first time through, said Tenten. As he entered the room, almost immediately he felt himself relaxing. A weight he hadn't even known he was carrying suddenly easing up off of his shoulders. Slowly, blue eyes traveled the room, finding 5 other sets of eyes, each one a familiar set, all gathered together in one section. However, it was as his eyes settled on a 6th set that a familiar grin covered his features. While he knew he and the owner of those jet black eyes would have to settle up, and soon for the moment, he pushed it to the side. For now he was content with the knowledge that though some were missing, his family, the one he built when he'd had no one else, was finally back together again. Soon enough he found himself seated surrounded on all sides with Shikamaru, Ino and Choji sitting just in front of him, Kiba, Hinata and Shino behind him, Sakura on his left, and Sasuke sitting to Sakura's left. It did not escape his attention that the seating arrangement was made by teams, which didn't really surprise him considering how close the other two teams were. It was only as the instructor walked in that Naruto's eyebrow twitched. "Hello, my name is Yumino Irika. I will be your instructor for the next few years." The words had passed through one ear and out of the other. These bastards had gotten Irika from the very start, while he'd been forced to go through two other bastards before he'd landed in the man's class the first time through. Was he jealous? Yes, he was, and he's a big enough man to admit it. Still, as always, he would look on the bright side. In this case, he'd get more time with his original older brother figure than he had the first time through. "So I take it you and this Irika are close?" questioned Minato quietly so that only his son and Kushina could hear him. "Yeah, he's the first person to ever acknowledge me as me." To the old man, even if he didn't see the fox or saw past it, "I would always be your son first. I always had that shadow even when I didn't know who my parents were with him. With Irika-sensei I'm just Naruto. Plus he's the only really decent guy I spent time with. Kakashi, Jiraiya and the old man are all perverts," said Naruto, getting an understanding nod from Minato, who well remembered the difficulties of talking to his sensei. The conversation had Kushina, however, biting at her lower lip to keep the outburst she felt coming inside. She could tirade over the injustice that was her son's life a little later. While the classes were just beginning elsewhere, Uzumaki Kushina could be found seated within her home worrying at her lower lip. Of course, in her mind the place wasn't quite home. Her home, the one built for her by Minato, had been destroyed 7 years ago. She had gotten it rebuilt but had left 3 years ago after that debacle with Kumo for a place a bit more secure. Tsunade had offered her the Senju estate, and they had since been living there, but it wasn't the same. She and Minato had both built what they had pretty much from nothing. Minato because he came from a civilian background, and she because everything she'd bought from Yuzu she'd outgrown with the sole exception of the picture of her parents, which had been destroyed when Minato got the harebrained idea to Hiraishi the fox to their house. Don't get her wrong, she loved the Senju estate, and was very thankful for Tsunade offering its use, especially with her clan constantly trickling in. That said, she still longed for her house that Minato had built for her with his own hands. Every time she had stepped into that house she had felt Minato's love for her, which is why she hadn't sold it when she left. The Senju estate, for all its extravagance, simply did not possess Minato's touch. Still, that particular topic wasn't why she was currently sitting in contemplation. No, in this instance the reason for that was her son. She had always had a close bond with Naruto even at his current age. When most boys would begin to pull away, Naruto didn't. He was still affectionate with her, always ready for a hug or come in and lay his head on her lap. Jiraiya had called him a mama's boy once, and Naruto had looked at him real serious, and simply said so before laying his head back in her lap. That said, by this point she figured she'd gotten reading her son's moods down quite well. She knew something was bothering him, had been bothering him for a while now. She sighed, wondering if perhaps she shouldn't have taken Sarutobi up on his offer of running the barrier squad. Still, it was a good job and they needed the money as they weren't getting that steady pay Minato had brought in when he was Hokage, and as she had taken time away from the active roster to raise her son, they were running low. Regardless, the point is, unlike most of her friends, she couldn't afford to be some stay-at-home mom. Thankfully, her skill with Fuinjutsu allowed her to take this job with its A and BU level base pay, captain level bonus due to her position, and the bonus for the job's importance to the village. Still, with the job she didn't have as much time to hang around with Naruto anymore. With her absence and the sudden withdrawal of Mikoto, Itachi and Shursui back into the Uchiha district, it left him pretty much on his own. Sure, he had a few cousins he could hang around with, but most of them were older and off on missions near constantly, and there weren't actually any boys his age in the village at this point. Her thoughts, however, were interrupted by a small plume of smoke off to her left, which quickly cleared to show a small slug sitting there, which quickly slid a scroll forward from out of its mouth. Reaching down without hesitation, the red-headed woman grabbed hold of the scroll, thanking the slug before it took its leave. After a few minutes of reading, a large smile sprung upon the woman's face as she leapt from her seat. "Well, someone's, wonder what the letter said," said Jiraiya. "It doesn't say, just moves on to the next scene," said Rin. Despite what anyone may say, it hadn't taken long for those that had and would one day be known as the Rookie Nine to fall into their academy roles. Of course, try as they might, things had already changed, and with that change their group had taken to being near each other at pretty much all times. Of course, the girls had their own classes, and members of those classes had been swapped around, leaving the three kunoichi to their own small group. Sasuke, like always, was a loner, while Naruto, Kiba, Shikamaru and Choji had always hung together even back then, and the inclusion of Shino took barely any adjustment. Still, throughout the day Shikamaru had noticed subtle differences in his friends. Two of his friends, Hinata, displayed much more confidence, though still soft-spoken and kind. None of her previous nervous tendencies were showing. The biggest change was, of course, Naruto himself. He was calm and attentive in his classes, his writing was beautifully done, and didn't come close to what it had once been as well. Of course, knowing a little bit about his friend's past, he could already see just what a huge difference having a support structure around him was. He had also noticed that he wasn't getting any of the hostile glares that had been thrown his way as a youth. People weren't treating him as they had after he dealt with pain, but they were treating him much better than they had in their first childhood. "I'm surprised you're actually paying attention to this stuff," stated the Nara heir as they relaxed during the lunch period. "It's all new to me. I didn't get this the first time through, so I'm taking it all in now while I can," said the blonde. "Don't do too well, you'll mess up the teams." "Nah, I'm just going to fail the final exam again." "You failed your finals?" exclaimed Kushina in shock. "Yeah, my graduation was special," said Naruto. "Naruto had too much chakra and not enough control. The academy failed to realize this," said Sakura with a frown. "He was failed on purpose," stated Sasuke, shocking everyone with his words. "Now that I think about it, the teachers were always looking for some excuse to kick him out with the exception of Irika-sensei," said Ino, frowning. "Fools with as much potential as he has, they nearly completely wasted it," stated Jiraiya. Rin, seeing that her sensei and Kushina were getting madder with each sentence, decided it would be best to start reading again. "You know you never did explain how you graduated last time," said Shikamaru, frowning. "I snuck into the Hokage's office and stole a scroll from his library." At this answer, the Nara heir couldn't quite hold his surprise. The Hokage's office was one of, if not the most well-guarded place in the village. The fact that the original 12-year-old Naruto could infiltrate it well enough to get in and out of the Hokage's library left him reeling. Following that feeling was one of irritation, as the tactician inside him realized just what kind of stealth operative Naruto could be, and that his potential in that area had not only not been realized but had been blatantly ignored by the higher-ups. Naruto, however, had his own thoughts towards that point as well. He had initially thought he would pass the exam himself, but had thought that if things lined up well enough he could purposely fail and, like before, oust Mizuki as the traitor he was and get another look at the scroll of seals. "You stole the scroll of seals," stated Minato with a frown. "Yup, and learned the Kage Bunshin in less than an hour," said Jiraiya, surprising all of the adults with the exception of Tsunade. "You're kidding," said Sarutobi, his eyes narrowed in thought. "Nope. According to the report, he stole the scroll, escaped into the forest, and learned that technique in less than an hour," said Tsunade. "Unbelievable," muttered Hayashi, while Rin decided to continue on while they were all silent. Throughout the rest of the day, things continued on in that vein, with everyone trying to readjust themselves back into academy life. Of course, knowing that they could all pass the graduation exam at that point if they decided to take them, the group decided as a whole to instead focus on training for the next 5 years. The goal was to get back to their true strength by the time they left the academy, and if possible surpass those points. Naruto's newfound intelligence continued to pleasantly surprise his friends throughout the day. Finally, after a day full of beginner lessons, it was over and classes released for the day. As he exited the main doors, Naruto was surprised and a bit saddened to see a large red-haired man standing before the entrance instead of his mother. Standing at 6 feet 2 inches, the man before him was a wall of muscle who wore the garb of a jounin of the hidden leaf. His long red hair hung down to his mid-back, with bangs hanging from the top of his head to cover his forehead, along with trails from each side of his face that hung down to his mid-chest. "Kami-sama," breathed out Sakura upon spotting the man. "Now that's a man," said Ino, with Sakura nodding mutely alongside her. "Okay, who is that?" questioned Kiba, trying desperately to ignore the two girls. "My uncle, Uzumaki Kuru." "What?" exclaimed Kushina, sitting up with a jolt when the screen lit up to show a picture of the man. "Oh, mama likes," said Ino, her eyes wide. "Hey, no ogling my brother!" exclaimed Kushina, knocking Ino out of her fantasies along with every other female. "Okay, looks like it's almost done, so please try and hold all comments until the end," said Rin, getting nods all around. Uzumaki Kuru, the eldest child and only son of Uzumaki Genryusai, which made him the older brother of Uzumaki Kushina. The man had appeared one day when he was about 5, and by the time he'd left the Hokage's office had secured the ranking of jounin. Despite this, however, he didn't go on missions that often, instead opting to take on the role of his nephew's primary trainer. Since day one, the man had been drilling him mercilessly when it came to training time, and Naruto had found within him a kindred spirit when it came to the subject. Still, as he approached, the blonde's eyes narrowed, noticing people hanging around watching him. As his eyes darted around, he found himself slowing down as he unconsciously prepared for a fight. "Ah, nephew, there you are. Hurry up, your mother and the Akimichi are throwing a feed." The words had immediate effect, and not only did he relax, but his mouth began to water. One thing that hadn't changed with him was how much he liked to eat. Of course, now that he wasn't being shunned by the villagers, he found he liked a lot more foods than before. "Naruto, have I mentioned how much I love mother lately?" questioned Choji quietly. If it was just about anyone else, their head would have already flown from their body. Naruto was very protective of his mother, however, because it was Choji, the only person whose love of food rivaled his own, he'd let it slide. Still, he could tell the words had affected more than just the two of them, as everyone in the area appeared to be affected by them. The people of Konoha had learned that if there was anything outside of their Fuinjutsu and Kenjutsu that the Uzumaki were passionate about, it was their food. They loved to cook. The Akimichi loved to cook mostly because they all loved their food. "Food coma, here I come," said Kiba, already picturing the feast ahead. "Sasuke, your mother's already there, come get your plate," called Kuru, spotting the hesitation in the Uchiha, which was soon wiped out. For Sasuke, despite the distance he and Naruto were putting between each other, there existed very little that could keep him from his godmother's food. The fact was he enjoyed the spicy and Kushina brought the spicy. Of course another reason he kept his distance was because somehow he knew this was the same Naruto he initially grew up with that had somehow been flung back in time with him. They had unfinished business and by mutual agreement had chosen to avoid each other until they were ready to settle up. Still he reasoned that in this instance their problems could be set aside for the sake of food. A quick glance between them showed Naruto felt the same way. Nearly 4 hours later found Naruto leaning back in his chair, his stomach full and with a toothpick in his mouth. All around him from what he could see his friends, family, civilians, and shinobi and loads of members from other clans could be seen in similar states of contentment. The turnout had surprised him because it had appeared as if the entire village had turned up. Of course many had picked up plates and left, but plenty had stayed to enjoy the festive atmosphere. Naruto had been surprised to find Tsunade had been in attendance when he arrived, but he was glad to see her there regardless. He could see the vast majority of his friends were currently passed out with the exception of Choji, who had, like him, also just finished eating. Suddenly he frowned as a strange scent hit his senses, which caused him to narrow his eyes. "What the hell is that?" muttered the blonde, catching Choji's attention. "About time, Gaki. I've been sensing it for a while. Extend your senses." Surprised to be hearing from the fox, the blonde frowned but did as told, extending his senses outwards only to be rocked backwards as the negative emotions slammed into him. Steadying himself quickly, he closed his eyes and quickly traced them back to their origins, only for his eyes to snap open wide in horror. In the next instant he leapt to his feet, moving quickly over to Jiraiya and whispering urgently into his ear. His words had immediate effect as the man immediately sobered and leapt away. A single look to Tsunade had the same effect, which immediately had her place the bottle of sake down. The next morning all classes were cancelled and the news was already making its rounds. Somehow within that small window the Uchiha clan had been massacred, reduced from a clan of over 200 to a clan of less than 50, the vast majority of which were civilians. Of the shinobi to survive, the numbers were in the single digits, while majority of those spared were children. As it was, all those who were spared, including Uchiha Mikoto and her son Sasuke, were all present at the Uzumaki clan cookout during the duration of the massacre. Of course there were some Uchiha who would enter the village over the next few days, returning from missions, adding to their numbers by 10. The only one missing would be Uchiha Itachi, who it was reported had fled the village after committing the massacre. The 14-year-old ANBU captain would be placed within the bingo book as an S-class nukenin. Though the action was horrible, certain individuals in the village knew that it could have been much worse, with only a single survivor avoided, not by careful planning or an ambush during the massacre, but by Uzumaki Kushina's desire to throw a cookout for her son. "That's it, chapter's done," spoke Rin after a few moments. "So who wants the next chapter?" questioned Tsunade, looking around the room. "Chapter 3. spoke the man after finding the correct page. As the early morning light shined over the village of Konoha, the people could be seen going about their day. As shops began to accept their first customers of the day and villagers and shinobi made their way through the streets, there was a sense of peacefulness about the morning. This sense, however, was ruined as a man dressed in the full uniform of a Chunin fell from a rooftop, only barely managing to avoid crashing into a cart. From the rooftops a cackle could be heard as a young boy shook off the last of his pursuers. The boy himself wore a pair of black pants and a dark blue hooded sweatshirt. The center of the top, however, was an orange strip composed of the zipper and edges that led up to the orange hood. He possessed short, spiky blonde hair and cerulean blue eyes that shined with amusement, with 3 whisker-like markings on each of his cheeks. "Thanks for playing. Better luck next time," thought the boy with a chuckle before dashing across the rooftops with speed before dropping down into the street in front of the window to a shop. "Gaki, you won't get away so easy!" exclaimed the Chunin, now back on the rooftops, as he passed the boy by. "Getting into trouble a little early today, aren't we, Naruto?" Turning to the voice, he was greeted to the smiling face of an older woman who, if he had to guess, was probably in her early 30s. She wore a light beige robe with a blue apron covering the entirety of her front. Her brown hair was pulled up and secured by a hair net, giving no clue as to its length. "No way, you're only in trouble if you get caught. Seriously, what did you do this time?" questioned Ino, having always secretly been a fan of the prankster. "Probably something stupid," said Sakura, not the least bit amused. "Come on, Sakura, even you've got to admit a lot of what he did was funny," said Tenten. "Funny nothing, it was legendary," said Kiba with a laugh. "Guess you're in trouble now then," came a new voice, causing him to turn to see 2 more Chunin, 1 male and 1 female. "Doesn't feel like a generic Chunin number 59. Not even a little bit," said the boy, causing the male's eyebrow to twitch. "Just give it a second, it will sink in," said the female just before she yelped, as both she and her partner were sunk into the ground up to their shoulders before the ground hardened around them. "Well, that's a new one," said the woman behind the counter, as she handed over a container which he quickly tucked away into a seal in his pocket. "Yeah, it's my new quicksand seal. It's part of a set I designed. The reaction is a little delayed though," said the blonde as he handed over a few ryo. Taking back to the rooftops, he found himself frowning as he was surrounded by several Chunin. Perhaps they really were getting better. Despite this, however, he grinned foxily as he noticed something rather glaring about his current company, thus causing all of them to tense, especially as he brought his hands up into a single seal. He was surrounded by a plume of smoke which quickly cleared to show a buxom blonde lying on the roof of the building wearing a rather revealing devil's costume complete with horns and a tail. Winking, the blonde brought a single gloved hand up before blowing out a kiss with immediate results, as every person surrounding him was immediately launched backwards via nosebleed. Classic! Exclaimed Kiba, roaring with laughter. Cammy, it's been so long I forgot he did shit like that, said Ino, trying and failing to hide a smile as she shook her head. What the hell was that? Questioned Kushina with an eyebrow twitching. The upgrade to the technique that got Erosen in to train me, said Naruto, causing said woman to turn her glare onto said pervert, who flinched noticeably. Well, at least it had clothes on this time, said Sakura with a sigh. Nothing beats the classics, said the snickering blonde as he left his victims behind. From there it didn't take him long to reach his destination as he landed in front of the academy. At the entrance he was greeted to the sight of the Sandame standing calmly with his pipe in his mouth. Moving towards him, the boy handed over a scroll to the man, smirking as the man accepted it. His little game with the Chunin earlier was simply his way of telling the old man that the Chunin were not good enough to catch him if he wanted something. Of course the old man had thought otherwise, as such the two had made a bet. If Naruto beat the Chunin, the Hokage would teach him in fire nature transformation and one technique of said nature. On the flip side, however, if the blonde lost, he would tell the old man the secret to beating paperwork. You know the secret to beating paperwork? Exclaimed three voices at once. Yes, I do, said the blonde with a grin. Leaving the old man behind as the two went their separate ways, the blonde made his way through the halls of the academy and slipped inside of class to find it still nearly empty. Moving up to his seat, he slipped a hand in his pocket and retrieved the container he'd received earlier before handing it off to Hinata. Over the last few years the two of them had grown closer, much closer if he were to be honest about it. While really the entire group had grown closer than ever as friends, with Hinata he just felt that what they had was special. They had started spending a lot of time together, as she had become his regular training partner. Still, he hadn't actually seen her at all the last 2 days. Today, being Monday, had given them all their usual 2 days off. As such, as usual, they spent the 15 minutes prior to class catching up on what the other had been up to. Hinata had of course spent her weekend sequestered within the Hyuga estate, spending her time with her mother and sister. The real Hinata, upon hearing that, couldn't hold back the wistful expression that had come over her face at these words. She had dreams of doing just that, and unfortunately knew that those dreams would never become her reality. Hitomi, from her position beside her, took that moment to wrap her arm around her daughter's, causing her to smile. Naruto, however, hadn't done something so simple or relaxing. For one thing, his mother was a working mom, and he had gotten used to her not being around all the time over the last few years. That said, he had spent his time quite well in his opinion. Having figured out a way to reinforce his clones a while back, he'd created a pair of them and sent them off to work. One he'd sent to study Fuinjutsu, something he'd developed quite the interest in during this new lease on life. The second clone, however, he'd sent to the south side. Unlike his first run through his life, he hadn't left the game at age 7. Instead, he had kept going strong until he was 11, and as such had successfully rebuilt his emergency fund for the now even less likely chance he ever had to leave Konoha for some reason. Of course, he was still a few million Rio from where he had been, but he also didn't have those A and S rank checks yet. As others began making their way into the room, he soon found himself sitting down in his own seat. The noise level had of course risen significantly, but then again he could understand why, as they were nearing the beginning of the exam period. Unlike in his previous run-through where the exam had been simple, the graduation exam was now much more complex. Of course, the first time he lived through it, the exam had only consisted of a written exam and the demonstration of the Bunshin technique. What, that's it? Demanded Rin, an expression of disbelief on her face. The difference in difficulty, however, he had expected. Jiraiya had informed him that because the damage of the attack that night hadn't been as bad as it was originally, they hadn't lost nearly as many shinobi. That meant that they had never lost control of the academy, which now made it much harder to get through even to graduation. As it was, many of his friends had been surprised when coming into their final year the class makeup had been much different than it had been previously. The classes themselves were now much more practical in nature, and as such not nearly as boring an environment he was actually thriving in. That said, for the previous week they'd gone through a mock exam that had started with an obstacle course, which he had of course finished in first place. They'd had a review for the written exam as well, which looked like it would now be much longer. They also had to demonstrate working knowledge of at least 3 different elemental jutsu. Then there had been the infiltration exam, a genjutsu exam, and a weapons exam. All in all, he felt like he had gotten a pretty good grasp in everything so far, and was thankful that he hadn't taken the medic course like Hinata, Ino, and Sakura had, as they had all looked dead on their feet after that one. Of course, due to the fact that he knew that he would be purposely failing the actual exam, he had figured he'd actually tried during the last week, and had found himself having quite a bit of fun with it. Alright, everyone, settle down. The sound of Irika's voice easily caught his attention. Turning towards the man, he found himself smiling. He and Irika had, despite the odds, become even closer than they had in his first run-through, whereas the first time they'd had the hurdle of the fox to get over, this time it had been much easier. Of course, he had his enhanced hearing to thank for the fact that he could actually hear the man even with most of the students talking. Also, unlike his first run-through, his seal had been under constant observation by Uzumaki-grade seal masters, and as such they'd caught on to the fact that the filter in the seal had started degrading and been almost fully degraded by the time he'd reached his 8th birthday. From there it was discovered that his body had been taking in a lot of the fox's raw demonic chakra, which had been throwing his control out of whack. Of course, this was worsened by the fact that the entire fox had been sealed inside him, and not only half as his father had intended. Not to mention it was much more potent than the man had thought. As such, the seal he designed had simply been overworked by the sheer power it was containing, and the filter had failed almost 2 years later. Upon fixing that, however, a number of things had happened, such as a major boost to all of his senses and the fact that he could actually regenerate now. They'd been told, however, that if it had gone on even a year longer it would have started affecting his intelligence. "What?" exclaimed Kushina in horror, her face paling as she held her son closer into her side. The only people, however, that knew about that side effect from his original run-through were Tsunade, Jiraiya, and Kakashi. All three had admitted they had been surprised about just what he'd accomplished even with such a handicap working against him. For his part, Minato sat frowning as he listened to what had happened with the seal. Sharing a look with his old sensei, he determined that it would be wise for him to look over the seal once they wrapped up the current chapter. The older Kakashi, however, was frowning as he thought about just how many times Naruto's lack of intelligence had crossed his mind. Sure, when he was focused he was quite crafty and cunning, however any other time it was like dealing with a 5-year-old, at least it had been in the past. He was better now, but the fact that his condition had been brushed aside so easily was worrying. Now then, before anything else, I want to congratulate you all. It is my pleasure to announce that each and every one of you have passed your graduation exams. What? Looks like they hit them with the Biwako special, said Jiraiya, chuckling along with quite a few of the adults. In the world in which we live, in this profession we have given our lives to, you must expect deception around every corner. In the last week you felt like you were doing a review and many of you let your guards down. In that instance we capitalized on that weakness, in this case by subtly encouraging you to try harder. The end result of this was that many of you scored higher than what you would have scored if you knew. Many of you relaxed, and things came easier to you as a result. However, there were others that were believed to have been holding back, and we've suspected this for a while, said Iruka, smirking at the dumbfounded look sent his way. What followed was an explanation of how people did during the testing. Of course, the biggest surprise to most of the class was Naruto, who had apparently shattered the course records for both the infiltration and obstacle courses. He had to withhold a grimace as he learned that with how well he'd done in the testing overall, he just hopscotched to the middle of the pack in terms of class ranking. He wasn't the only one, however, as Hinata shrunk in on herself, learning she'd snagged the top kunoichi spot from Ino. At this high she frowned, learning that his child had been beaten in the rankings out of the academy. He, however, quickly reminded himself that she'd had no help, as she had been all but abandoned at a very young age, and as such would have had to do much on her own, with no help from anyone. This was something that he would not allow to occur now, however, as he had the forewarning to change it. Meanwhile, Jiraiya could be found sitting atop a fallen log smoking from his pipe as he watched a pair of fish cook over a fire. Over the last few years he'd been quite busy, but he could honestly say it had been worth it. His network was more extensive and powerful than ever after Naruto had introduced him to a few people. Learning about the kind of underworld contacts his godson had connections with had been a bit of shock, as the boy had never so much as even hinted of it in the past. Still, those same contacts had helped him immensely, so he hadn't pushed too hard in finding out how they had developed. Of course, there was also the fact that he had finally, after much struggle, fully mastered Sage Mode. Naruto had teased him mercilessly for quite a while until he'd gotten so fed up he just forced himself to concentrate on nothing but that training for months until he'd gotten it down. Having been forced to do nothing but train for a few months, however, it had at least gotten his body back into peak condition for his age. "Smells good out here," came a voice breaking him from his thoughts. Looking over, he was greeted to the sight of a woman who wore a black short-sleeved shirt and a pair of blue shorts that stopped at her upper thigh. She had long brown hair and brown eyes with purple rectangular markings on her cheeks. "Thank Kami-sama," breathed Obito, a smile appearing on his face as he slumped down into his seat, a sense of relief coming over him along with many others in the room. "How are you holding up?" questioned Jiraiya, getting a shrug in response. Same as always. The young woman before him was none other than Noira, the lost teammate of Kakashi. It had taken him nearly 2 years to track her down, and nearly another to catch her, but in the end he had managed to do so. He'd chased her all around the world doggedly until he'd caught her near Taki. When he'd first captured her, however, he'd had to break through a number of seals that had been placed on her. He'd called in help from the Uzumaki, and Kushina's brother Kuru himself had shown up. Thanks to the seals Danzo had used, her personality had been completely submerged, and another had been built in its place, and since then Danzo had been using her as a deep cover operative. Once he'd caught her, however, and with the help of Kuru they'd destroyed the other personality, allowing Rin to come out. However, Kuru had also been able to save the memories, and every day since then Rin had spent about 2 hours each morning in meditation, taking in new memories and incorporating them somehow. This helped in that she was able to keep whatever skills she gained and had none of the emotional baggage from anything that had happened. "So are we in any rush to get back?" questioned the woman. "Not really, just figured you'd like to get home by now." She appreciated that. It had taken 3 weeks for everything to click into place in her mind. There were many things she had done that, while she felt no emotional connection, had still sickened her. The things that she had seen and done while she was one of Danzo's puppets repulsed her. She had kidnapped children, murdered entire families, things that as a medic she was strictly against. The one good thing she could say is that she was still a virgin. Danzo apparently didn't believe in sex training or missions as it could evoke emotions in his operatives. Well, that's one good thing, said Kurenai supportively, though Rin was blushing hotly at her lack of sexual life being spoken of. How about a detour? We're close to one of Danzo's treasure chests. The look she received from him at that was one that her sensei had adopted quite a bit. It was a look that said one word: explain. It was not a request, but a command, and something she was all too willing to do. By the time she was done with her explanation, Jiraiya's decision had been well and truly made. The old man would understand if he was delayed a little bit on his return. At the same time, back within the Leaf Village within the Hokage's office, a gathering of jounin could be seen. Also present sitting behind the desk was Senju Tsunade, the Godame Hokage. Unlike in the first go-through, she had taken the hat following the Uchiha massacre. She had felt she didn't have a choice but to step up during that time once she realized that her old sensei really didn't want to be Hokage anymore. It was because she stepped in when she had, however, that she was able to massively limit the power of the elders. While most of the village didn't know it, the council was fully aware that it had been the fault of the elders and Danzo that the massacre had happened. Because not everyone had died, Tsunade had been able to have Mikoto come in, where she explained that the clan had been in discussions with the daimyo's people and had been preparing to move to the capital. With this, the slug Sannin had been able to tie a noose around the necks of the elders, booting all three from the council, and stripping them of much of their power and influence as a result. At the same time, she had snatched back the power that they had taken after the death of the Yondaime, which had allowed her the leeway to restructure things as she liked. One of the major pieces of this restructuring had been with the academy, as she had basically overhauled the entire curriculum. As such, over time the rates of initial graduates had slowed, but over time those that had graduated had done so with a higher survival rate after missions. At the moment, the group were all assembled and looking into the Hokage's crystal ball, which was showing a scene at the academy. The jounin had all been previously briefed on the formation of their respective teams. At the moment, they were all watching as the group of students were gathered outside of the academy, having an impromptu tournament between them. Many of those gathered were actually quite happy with what they were getting in this new crop. Tsunade, however, found herself trying to withhold a smirk as the various jounin shot smug looks at Kakashi, Asuma and Kurenai, all of whom appeared nonplussed. It helped that, like Kakashi before them, Asuma, Kurenai, and even Guy, who was also present, had their memories restored while Kurama had been awake about 2 years prior. The smug looks were mostly due to the fact that their respective teams were all for the most part hiding their abilities and holding back to levels appropriate for academy students. None of their teams had changed, and as such all three of the jounin were happy as they got a second chance with them as cute little genin. Of course, the smug looks the other jounin had soon started to be lost as the now frustrated group of time travelers began to cut just a little loose in their matches. As none of them had been put up against each other to that point, they didn't have to do much, and still showed they were a cut above the rest. As if such should be questioned. With the exception of the two girls there, they're all clan heirs, said Hayashi. That doesn't really matter in a fight though, said Naruto with a frown. He means that as clan heirs all of you would have started your training much earlier than many of your peers, said the older Kakashi. Is there really that much of a difference? Questioned Sakura. Yes. Children from civilian backgrounds don't get into the training until they reach the academy. Clan children start training at around 5, then clan heirs that start training at around 3 or 4 years old, said Kakashi, causing Sakura's, Tenten's and Naruto's eyes to widen. Meanwhile, on the academy grounds, Naruto could be found leaning back against the bark of a tree, a pleased smirk on his face as Hinata finished up her match, taking the victory rather easily. Of them all so far, Sakura had the hardest match, and even that was actually rather easygoing judging by her appearance afterwards. All of them had improved by leaps and bounds from where they were initially, and though they didn't train together, he could tell that much rather easily. Hinata, however, had grown the most as she went about the juken with a fluidity that he had never witnessed before in a practitioner of the style. He remembered when he had gone against Niji so long ago during their first Chunin exam, it had been pure speed and power that the older boy had possessed along with no small amount of skill. Despite this, Niji's stance had been solid, hard, but executed with such speed it didn't even matter. Hinata, on the other hand, seemed to be more fluid than Niji was when he used it. He hadn't been able to tell much with the rather short exchange, but whereas Niji would parry or block attacks thrown at him, Hinata seemed to flow around or through them, which allowed her to get closer to her opponent. It was almost as if the two of them fought with two different styles. His thoughts on that, however, were broken as he was nudged in his side. Blinking and coming out of his thoughts, he turned to Shikamaru, who motioned with his eyes at Irika. Following his gaze, he found himself looking to the scarred teacher before his gaze was drawn to the fighting area, and upon spotting his opponent felt a jolt shoot down his spine. TCH, this has troublesome written all over it, said Shikamaru. Naruto, however, paid him no mind, nor did he pay any attention to the worried exchanges of his friends. Instead, his eyes had locked onto the gaze of a pair of onyx eyes that were regarding him with equal intensity. Oh no, said Sakura, her eyes wide at the words. This can't be good, said Shikamaru, narrowing his eyes. Before anyone else could comment on this, the screen came to life showing the academy's training field. As he took the scene in, Shikamaru could see all of them were in their outfits they'd worn during the academy except for Naruto. He instead wore a pair of black pants and a blue short-sleeved hooded sweatshirt. The center of the top, however, was an orange strip composed of the zipper and edges that led up to the orange hood. Finally, on his forehead he wore the goggles he'd worn around that age, only they were blue instead of green. Aside from that, he was taller, maybe half a foot taller than when he knew the boy at that age, and his hair, while still spiky, was longer and was pulled into a tail at his upper back that was somehow still spiky, making him long like a blonde version of Jiraiya. This should be good, said Kiba, sitting forward in his seat. How the hell could you think that it's Naruto and Sasuke? Exclaimed Ino, looking at the boy as if he is crazy. Yeah, but it's them as kids. It's not like it's them, said the Inuzuka, pointing to the two in the room. It was only as Kiba said this that most of the room had realized that the two boys were now locking eyes with one another, and tension began to build within the room, at least before Naruto turned away to face the screen. As the tension left the room, several people let out sighs of relief. As two boys approached the middle of the field and moved to their positions, an excited smattering of chatter came from the gathered students. By this point, having spent years in class together, it was no secret the mutual dislike the two boys had for each other. For the two boys in question, however, the noise and the people creating it may as well not have even existed. In an instant they were in motion, the distance between them closed as they met fist to fist. As they met, a small shockwave passed over the area as they released the chakra that had been held in their fists. Undeterred, the two boys were soon a blur of motion as their fists flew and they blocked, parried and dodged attacks. Slipping past another punch aimed at his head, Naruto wasted no time securing the limb and using it to toss the boy over his shoulder. Sasuke, however, went with it, pushing chakra through his feet and using it and the throw to propel himself away, flipping himself in the air to land on his feet. As he landed, Naruto was already in motion, moving quickly to close the distance, causing Sasuke's eyes to widen at his speed. Throwing a jab out with his left to meet him, Sasuke was not prepared for the blonde to slip under it and to spin off to his left. As he was rising up, Sasuke met him with a kick to the chest which caused him to go tumbling back a bit before he flipped himself so that he was taking a knee. Frowning, the blonde looked over to his opponent only to be met with the scarlet gaze of the Sharingan, 2 tomo markings spinning in each. So that's the way you want to play, huh? Then let's play, thought the blonde as he slid into a stance. So we can hear their thoughts too in this setting, mused the younger Kakashi. Honestly, I don't think I want to know what anyone else is thinking, said Sakura. Maybe, but it will give us greater insight into people, said the Sandame, getting nods from a number of the other shinobi in the room, though all of them were focused on the screen. Sasuke on the screen launched himself forward, launching an overhead right that Naruto sidestepped, only for the Uchiha to launch a back fist with the same arm which the blonde dodged by leaning back so that it just passed his face, only for a left to come immediately after, only for Naruto to interrupt it by letting a kick loose with push kick with his right. Using his left hand to push the kick down only added momentum to the right hook Naruto followed with, which was dodged only for an elbow to immediately come flying at his face. Raising his arms to block, Sasuke found himself pushed back due to the strength behind the blow. This is taking too long. How about we skip the warm-up? Said Sasuke. You sure you can keep up? It won't be like before, said Naruto. You've said that before, said Sasuke. Fine, just don't start bitching when I'm done kicking your ass, said Naruto, before both suddenly became little more than blurs on the screen. Holy shit! Look at them go! Exclaimed Obito. That's not right, said Inoichi, watching with wide eyes as the two on screen clashed, with each clash causing a shockwave to go out. On the screen, the hand-to-hand fight suddenly came to an end as Sasuke took to the air and launched a massive fireball at the blonde. Seeing it coming, Naruto took in a deep breath before lurching forward with a roar, the force of which caused the fireball to detonate in midair. Naruto had already turned away from it, spinning to his left and lashing out with his right hand, a blade of wind extending from his fingertips which had Sasuke going wide-eyed as it cut into him, only for him to be replaced by a log. Reappearing behind the blonde, Sasuke rammed a kunai into his back only for his body to burst into smoke. Ignoring it, Sasuke began flying through a chain of seals before ducking down and leaning back just before the blonde emerged from the ground with an uppercut which carried him into the air as he missed. Taking a deep breath and expelling it, Sasuke blew out a massive fireball that slammed right into him, causing the clone to burst into smoke. It was pure instinct alone that had him leaping backwards as Naruto descended on him, emerging from the cover of a tree, and hit the ground with a punch strong enough to create a small crater. Before he could touch the ground, however, a golden spear-tip chain launched out from the ground and coiled itself around him so fast that his limbs snapped to his sides. Like I said, it's not the same as before, said Naruto, smirking as he stood to his feet, allowing him to see the chain actually emerging from his left arm. With a roar, Naruto yanked the chain, and as a result Sasuke backed towards him before proceeding to land a savage right to the Uchiha's gut that flung him away like a ragdoll as the chain vanished, while Sasuke flew through the air for nearly 10 feet before he hit the ground and rolled for a few more before coming to a stop. Such strength, said Hiruzen in surprise. In terms of pure brute strength, Naruto's always been stronger than his peers. Even if his opponent was more skilled, one punch from him has been enough to end a fight, said Jiraiya. Like the time he fought Neji. He spent the entire fight getting outclassed and landed one punch to put him out of the fight, said Kiba, not even looking away from the screen. The fuck was that? He's twice as strong as he was last time in that chain. Since when could he do something like that? He's not even using the Kyuubi's power this time. thought the Uchiha heir from his position on the ground as he found himself struggling to breathe, his mind flying a mile a minute. As his ability to breathe returned, however, his thoughts slowed as he calmed himself, and pieces fell into place into his mind. He had expected to fight the same Naruto from before, but he'd forgotten in his eagerness he wasn't the same. The Naruto he knew before had been an unwanted orphan, and this one had been raised with the backing of the Uzumaki clan. Of course he was different. Of course he was stronger. That was fine though. The blonde wasn't the only one who was stronger than before. At the end of the day he was still more special than Naruto. As his thoughts finalized, he stood to his feet before he vanished, and Naruto suddenly found himself flying backwards through the air before he flipped himself, his feet touching the ground only for him to skid back for nearly another foot before he stopped. It doesn't matter how much you've changed. Before these eyes you will always be the same worthless loser, said Sasuke, looking up with a pair of fully matured Sharingan eyes. In the next instance he disappeared once more, only for a pair of chains to emerge from the blonde's torso and launch themselves at him. As they neared, Sasuke slipped between them, his hands flying through seals before he spewed out a massive fireball, only for another chain to erupt from the ground and split it in two. Undeterred, the Uchiha increased his speed, pivoting just before the chain and spinning off to his right, and then vanished only to reappear crouched beneath the blonde and launching him into the air with a rising kick to the chin. Recovering quickly, Naruto used the momentum to execute a quick backflip to gain space, only to be met by a kick to the back mid-flip that sent him crashing to the ground. There's that arrogance again, thought the blonde, taking a moment to catch his breath. It's part of the curse, came the unmistakable voice of Kurama, the Kyuubi no Kitsune. What curse? Demanded Fugaku. Of course he wasn't the only one, just the loudest to react. Throughout the room expression ranged from confused to contemplative. Several people such as the Naros, Minato, Hiruzen, Tsunade, Jiraiya, the elder Kakashi and Hayashi narrowed their eyes in thought, while Itachi, Sasuke, Obito and Mikoto were all frowning. The rest of the group, however, were all confused at this, including Asuma himself. Still, at this, the group all collectively could admit they were glad to be able to hear thoughts in this setting, otherwise they may have missed something important. That's the second time you've mentioned a curse. You finally going to tell me what you did? Retorted the blonde. After you finish this, said the fox, causing the blonde to frown. Right then, one order of humbled Uchiha coming up. Standing to his feet, Naruto unzipped his hoodie before removing it and tossing it aside. It flew for nearly 5 seconds before it hit the ground with a crash, creating a crater in its landing spot, much to the shock of those watching. Kami, how much does that thing weigh? Exclaimed Ino in shock. Judging by the crater it made, more than Lee's weights did around that time, said Niji. Is it even a good idea to wear so much weight like that so young? Questioned Sakura. Normally I would say no. Naruto may be the exception to that, thanks to the fox, said Tsunade. On the screen the picture had moved slowly from the discarded shirt to the stunned class and teacher until finally it turned to Naruto. It was revealed beneath the sweatshirt he'd been wearing a dark blue sleeveless GI top, his chest sticking out due to his muscular form, which was only supported by the compacted muscles, deltoids, triceps, biceps, flexors and extensors, all of them showing clearly defined muscle. Before he could even move to loosen himself up, Sasuke had vanished, only for Naruto to tilt his head to the left, causing the punch to miss his face. In the next instant they were blowing, with Sasuke throwing a barrage of punches and kicks while Naruto dodged around them. Undeterred by all of the missed attacks, Sasuke picked up the speed of his attacks, constantly pressing the other boy. How are they so fast? Questioned Rin in surprise. Training, it's the only way you can obtain that kind of speed, said the younger Kakashi. The amount of chakra they're expending must be incredible too, said Inoichi. Damn it, thought Naruto in irritation, just barely dodging a blow to his left side by sidestepping. Fucking Sharingan. Its fully matured form must have a much higher predictability than I thought. He's slower than me, but those damned eyes are allowing him to predict my movements far enough in advance that he actually seems faster, thought the blonde, dodging through punches that were getting steadily closer to hitting him. Hey, is it just me, or are those punches getting slower? Questioned Ino. No, he's running out of gas, said Kiba, smirking. On the screen Naruto's dodging began to get easier with each attack, with a wider gap between him and the strikes. Seeing this, Sasuke upped his speed, frowning as he blonde did likewise. Finally blocking a wide hook, Naruto retaliated, slamming a knee into the other boy's stomach, causing him to freeze before nailing him with an uppercut and a roundhouse kick that sent the Uchiha flying and landing with a tumble. Alright, enough, called Irika as the two finally stopped, both of them panting heavily, with most of the rest of the class speechless as they finally came into their view. As he climbed to a knee, Sasuke looked over to find Naruto hunched over with his hands on his knees. You've gotten better, you actually have some sense of style now, you're not just throwing wild punches out, said Sasuke between pants before getting to his feet. You too. You've actually got strength behind your fist now, said the blonde before straightening up. As he stood, Sasuke visibly froze, his eyes going wide, showing his shock. Those eyes, how the hell do you have them? Demanded Sasuke. Slowly the view moved to focus on Naruto, focusing on his face to show his eyes were now a light purple in color, and featuring the signature pattern of a fully matured Sharingan, for several long moments before the screen went black. What the hell? Exclaimed several people, not the least of which was Naruto himself, who was gaping at the sight. How's that possible? Exclaimed Sakura. It isn't, This is some kind of trick. I've fought him harder than that. Hell, even our fight with Haku was harder. If he had the Sharingan, it would have manifested by this point," said Sasuke, his eyes narrowed. "Could the sage have done it?" "I mean, we know he did something to him when Naruto met him in the beginning," said Choji. "Maybe, but I don't think so. I mean, if he could just hand out a Dijitsu, why not the Rinnegan then?" Questioned Tenten. "It could be genetic. I mean, he descends from the sage, so he could possess the genome," said Ino. "Nope. Far too much time has passed for that. It's already been bred out of his line by this point," said Sakura instantly. "Well, we won't get any answers sitting here talking about it. How about we let the book tell us?" said Shikamaru, sighing at the looks he received from that as everyone turned their attention his way. Asuma picked the book back up and after scanning through a few pages found where the screen left off. Before Sasuke could do more than take a step towards the confused-looking blonde, a figure landed near them, causing them to turn and face him, and subsequently the class. The figure was one very familiar to the two boys as well as the rest of those who would become the Rookie Nine, as it was none other than Hatake Kakashi. "You're interrupting something good right now," said Sasuke, not taking his eyes off of Naruto. Ma, both of you stand down. Iruka's called for you to do so a few times now." As he said this, he went from looking at a panting Sasuke to the panting Naruto, only for his exposed eye to widen in shock at the sight that greeted him. Checking discreetly for a genjutsu and finding none, the copy ninja turned his full attention to the blonde. "Naruto, I need you to pull back on your chakra now before anyone else shows up." Frowning, the blonde did so, with Kakashi watching intently as the purple Sharingan faded from his eyes and were replaced by his regular blue orbs. Naruto stumbled for a second before regaining his footing and moving over to collect his hoodie. As he did so, Kakashi looked over to Sasuke to find his eyes had also faded back to his regular onyx orbs. "You need these two for anything else, Iruka?" "I need to borrow them for a bit," said Kakashi, breaking the Chunin from his stupor. "No, we're done for the day. Those two were the last ones," said Iruka before calling out to the rest of the class. "All right, you lot, report back to the academy in a week for team assignments." Nearly an hour later found Naruto, Sasuke and Kakashi seated within the Hokage's office. Both the Godame and the Sandame were present, as were both of their mothers, though in this instance it was in their role of clan heads. They'd been in discussion for most of that time, trying to figure out how he had gained access to the Sharingan, as it was obvious they were still his eyes and not a transplant. The discussion was interrupted by a knock on the door before Shizen poked her head in. "Lady Tsunade, there is a Yanagi Shojiro here to see you. He says he has important information for you regarding Naruto-kun," said Shizen, getting a frown from Tsunade before after a few moments she allowed the man entrance. The person who entered was clearly a civilian by their state of dress. Despite that, the man stood at about 5 feet 8 inches judging by her visual guess, and was covered in muscle judging by his arms. "Thank you for seeing me, Hokage-sama," said the man, bowing his head respectively. "I'm told you have information for me," said the Sannin with narrowed eyes. "Yes. My family has been guarding it since the end of the Warring States period. When I heard of Naruto-sama's manifestation, I came as soon as I could," said the man, retrieving a scroll from a satchel at his side and passing it over. "You've read it?" questioned Tsunade. "No, my great-grandmother received specific instructions regarding that scroll. It was only to be presented to anyone if certain conditions were met. Naruto-sama awakening the Sharingan is such a condition," explained the man. "How do you know about that?" questioned Mikoto quickly. "Children talk. No one thought to tell them they shouldn't," answered the man. Ignoring that, Tsunade opened the scroll and was surprised to see a storage seal embedded inside of it under a script. "To whom it may concern, my name is Senjutoka, and if you are reading this and are of the Tatsuki bloodline, it means you have awoken your true bloodline. For the sake of security, I have sealed within another scroll explaining my actions that only someone of my direct bloodline would be able to open. With this being the case, do so if you wish to obtain the knowledge that you seek." Read the woman silently. "Thank you for bringing this," said Tsunade. "Of course, it was my family's honor to be of service," said the man with a bow before he stepped out. "Open this brat, read it out loud," said Tsunade, tossing the scroll to Naruto. Catching it easily, and upon seeing the instructions, Naruto sat the scroll on his lap and bit his thumb before pressing it into the seal, which caused a small puff of smoke which cleared to show another scroll. Unrolling it, he found nothing but words before doing as told, and reading this. "Whomever you are, if you are reading this, then my precaution has failed. My name is Senjutoka, and I am your grandmother, great-grandmother, or something along those lines. I know you are not my own child, as Fuka is already married and a baker in Hai no Kuni's capital. As such, you can only be a descendant. Something interests you, Minato?" questioned the Sandame, seeing the look of shock on his face. "My great-grandmother was Tatsuki Fuka, and this scroll is concerning the Tatsuki bloodline," said Minato, his gaze not moving from Asuma. "Let me start by saying now that my relationship with your grandsire was not some hidden romance or anything remotely as stupid as young girls are likely to imagine, nor was it a mistake made out of drunken revelry. In truth, ours was a coupling made out of desperation and fear of our lives more than anything. At the time, Kanohigaku no Sato was still but a dream in the mind of my cousin Hashirama, nowhere near even its initial implementation. We had been called by the daimyo of Hai no Kuni along with a number of other clans. Among this group were the Uchiha, including your grandsire, Izuna, so he descends from Izuna-sama," said Mikoto. It appears so, said Fugaku. Who? questioned Kiba. Uchiha Izuna, Madara's younger brother. He led the Uchiha clan alongside Madara before he was killed during the Warring States period, said the Sandaime. At the time I didn't know who he was. Clan markings had been banned for this meeting and a lot of us were informed that the daimyo of Tsuchi no Kuni had launched an invasion of Hai no Kuni and would be arriving the next day. The news was frightening. I was 14 and while I was well trained we were speaking of warfare between shinobi on an open field. To be completely honest, I thought I would die in the battle and I was determined not to die a virgin. During the daimyo pre-battle feast I was approached by a boy around my age who only introduced himself as Izuna, which was a common name, and after some conversation I allowed him to lead me from the room. So she just went just like that? Questioned Sakura surprised. Such actions weren't uncommon back then or at any period during wartime, especially for those on the front lines, said Tsunade. Still it seems kind of impulsive, said Tenten. You say that now, but when you have the time before a major battle to contemplate your mortality, and weigh your skills against what's coming, your thought process is different, said Kurenai. I did not realize that Izuna was Uchiha Izuna until during the battle when he saved my life with his Sharingan revealed. After the battle I did not see him again and I was invited to stay in the capital as part of the daimyo's guard. I discovered I was pregnant a few months into the job and was soon assigned to the family wing, and was subsequently hidden. During this time the daimyo located a suitable family to raise Fuka. After I recovered from the birth I placed a seal on Fuka, one that would suppress the presence of any bloodline in the body and in effect ensure it never activated, and tied it to her blood, an action I will never regret. Wait, you can link a seal into someone's blood? Questioned Tenten surprised. Yes. It was one of the mistakes of the Uzumaki clan to share such a secret, even to an ally such as the Senju. It ranks right up there with sharing the secrets of containing the Biju, said Kushina frowning. How was sealing the Biju considered a mistake? Questioned Inoichi frowning. Because people have been trying to weaponize them since. The Biju are considered living natural disasters. It would be like weaponizing a hurricane, said Minato. It's more than that. These are sentient creatures. What right does anyone have to steal their power to hide their own weakness? Said Naruto. If it were learned there was a child of the Senju bloodline with the Sharingan, the attacks would have never stopped coming. If the Sharingan is active in you, I urge you to be wary and only sparsely use it. The Uchiha are not above killing even a child. If instead you have awakened the Mokuton like my cousin has, I urge you to hide it even more. Hashirama has become quite feared for this ability, and I fear many would see you dead just so that reach even half of his level of ability. If instead you have awoken some other bloodline trait, then I offer my congratulations and my apologies. The life we live is a hard one, and if you have chosen to become a shinobi, then I have forced you to do so, and never reach your full potential. If somehow you have inexplicably been able to overcome the seal, then I offer my congratulations, but once again I urge you to be cautious. That's the end of the chapter, said Asuma after flipping the page before closing the book. So that explains why he was able to activate both the Uzumaki chains and the Sharingan while our Naruto was unable to do so, said Kurenai. Is there some way to break this seal? Questioned Naruto. Dude, aren't you strong enough? Said Kiba. Not for me, for him, said Naruto pointing at his father, surprising the room. If you can, then at least one version of me could grow up with both of his parents, said Naruto softly. Break your as well, said Sasuke, surprising everyone. Don't want it, don't need it, said Naruto, much to the shock of several people. We're not through yet. I don't want to fight you again and you're handicapped. It makes beating you again worthless, said the Uchiha. Ha, told you he didn't notice. Pay up, said Kiba, getting Choji to grumble before handing over a wad of bills. The hell are you on about? Demanded the Uchiha. Your fight at the Valley of the End 3 years ago. Naruto released the Rasengan at the last minute. You didn't do anything, he let you win, said Neji, causing Sasuke to go wide-eyed before furiously spinning to his blonde rival with the Sharingan activating with his rage only to be held in place by Itachi. Enough of that, I'm more interested in this curse the QB spoke about, said Fugaku. As am I, said the Sandaime. Hey Kurama, you mind explaining that bit? Questioned Naruto mentally. I've told you before, brat, you have not earned the right to speak my name, came the reply from the fox, though there was no heat in it. We'll have to hope the book answers that. The fox is refusing to answer, said Kushina. I struck out too, said Naruto with a sigh. Let's move on then. Who's next? Questioned Ino. Well, since you're so eager, you can go, said Asuma, tossing her the book. What? If Naruto Awakens Ashura Chakra Chunin Exams. And thanks for watching my video till the end. If you enjoy this content, then do consider subscribing to my channel, and leave a like if you guys need the next part. Comment down, and thanks for watching the video, and see you guys in the next video.